My husband used videos of me cheating to expose my affair to my dad and exact his ultimate revenge. My lover got out of bed and went to his adjoining hotel room to get ready for the day. We always booked 2 adjoining rooms with a connecting door to avoid suspicion. It wouldn't be good if our affair was discovered. I was Dan's executive assistant, and we had worked together for over 2 years, being lovers for most of that time. Due to my role, we often traveled together across the country for meetings and conferences, giving us plenty of time together without raising eyebrows. I was married, and my husband stayed at home. My marriage was a fast wedding at 18 after I got pregnant by my high school boyfriend, Alan. When our parents found out, mine wanted me to adopt the baby, but his parents insisted we keep her and offered their help. Alan supported me through the pregnancy despite the judgment from others. After a difficult labor, we welcomed our daughter, Lauren, 2 days after my 19th birthday and decided to keep her. My parents nearly disowned me, so we moved in with Alan's parents, who helped raise Lauren. After graduating, we both got jobs, married in a simple ceremony, and moved into a small house. Our plans for university were postponed when we had another daughter, Emma. Over the next decade, with hard work and support, we both earned university degrees while working part-time and raising our daughters. Alan was very close to the girls, but my relationship with them was strained. We often fought, and I sometimes resented them, blaming them for the life I had to give up. After graduation, I became the executive assistant to Dan Johnson, the business development manager for a medical device company. I was 32, and he was 41. We quickly became a strong professional team, and I loved my job. Sales were increasing, management was happy, and I got a raise. My job involved a lot of travel, often with Dan, which was exciting. We visited new places, met clients, negotiated deals, and interacted with executives. Though I was away from home 3 weeks out of 4, the experience was fantastic. Dan and I spent a lot of time together and became close. Despite our age difference, he was married with 3 young children. To prevent Alan from worrying about my travels, I lied that I mostly traveled alone or with another woman and downplayed my relationship with Dan. In truth, I was fascinated and attracted to Dan. We often found cozy restaurants for dinner, wine, and long conversations. About months in, after landing a big sales order, we celebrated with a special dinner and champagne. That night, Dan confessed his love for me. My heart raced, and after a moment of hesitation, I followed him to his room. We spent the night together. The next morning, I felt guilty but justified it as an experience I deserved, since I hadn't had the chance to explore relationships when I was younger. I also realized I had forgotten Emma's 11th birthday the night before. Despite the guilt, I acknowledged my involvement as Dan smiled and squeezed my hand on the plane home. When I got home, the guilt hit me again. Alan was happy to see me after a week away, but I avoided his hugs and kisses. That night, I declined his advances, claiming I was tired, though I was also sore from being with Dan. It was the first time I had ever turned Alan down. Our affair, which began 18 months ago, continued non-stop. Over time, I got over the guilt and hid my secret from Alan, emotionally disconnecting from him and our girls. My thoughts were always about Dan. Lying became second nature, and I didn't feel guilty anymore. I had fallen deeply in love with Dan and occasionally thought about leaving Alan for him. As our company expanded, Dan and I traveled more often for work. When there were no scheduled trips, we created fake business trips and spent the night in a nearby hotel. We also took short vacations together, using conferences as an alibi. We were careful at work, always behaving professionally and never meeting alone. We communicated through secret email accounts and never met in our town at home. I argued with Alan about my demanding boss and frequent travel. He often suggested finding a job with less travel, but I told him I was learning too much and earning well. During rare work events with partners, we were very cautious, briefly introducing our spouses before mingling with others. No one suspected anything. Alan was happy with my career success but annoyed by my frequent absences, which left him to handle most of the child rearing on top of his IT job. Although I still loved Alan, we were drifting apart and our affection had dwindled. I felt guilty and made a mental note to try to make it up to him. We had a rough start in life early on, having our first child getting married and having another shortly thereafter. Through hard work and teamwork, we managed to graduate from university, me with a degree in information technology and Amy with a degree in commerce, all while raising 2 girls. We overlooked the difficulties because we loved each other deeply. When Amy got her first professional job after graduation about 2 years ago, she was overjoyed, and I was very proud of her. Finally, we were both working professionally, earning a good salary, and could begin enjoying a normal life together. At first, I supported her career in every way I could, but I grew increasingly resentful of the long hours she worked and the amount of traveling she did. She left home around in the morning and usually didn't get home until, or in the evening. Most weeks she would be gone for at least 1 or 2 nights, sometimes more, and occasionally she wouldn't get home until Saturday afternoon. When she was home during the week, she either worked after dinner or just sat in front of the TV. On Saturdays, she would sleep late and then go shopping. On Sundays, she would go to the gym in the morning and then have lunch with her girlfriends. She was usually too tired to go out with me in the evening. We didn't spend much family time together. She was always too busy at work to take vacations, so the girls and I often vacationed without her. I noticed that her character was changing. The loving wife and mother was gone, replaced by a selfish, often irritated, and aloof person, and sharing my bed. Whenever I tried to bring it up, I was immediately rebuffed. She would say it was just my imagination, or that she was tired from work, or she was working hard for us, or that everything was fine. I worried about how it might end. At the end of her first year, I was required to accompany her to a Christmas party at the CEO's mansion. It was there that I first met her boss, Dan, and his wife. We chatted politely but briefly about nothing, then he bowed out and they went off to socialize. My wife led me to others and started a conversation with the other employees. Later, I thought it was a bit odd. Her boss seemed quite friendly, though a bit reserved, not the ogre Amy had described. Dan's wife was also very pleasant. Since Amy was his executive assistant, I thought we would have more than just polite, cursory conversation. I also sensed that Amy was a little tense. She had a habit of talking really fast when she was nervous, and it gave her away. I thought it was odd that she was nervous around her boss when they worked so closely together. It was perplexing to me. Although I trusted her completely, I still put the thought aside for later. Over the next year, I was very busy as I decided to start my own IT consulting company. Additionally, I was practically single-handedly raising our girls, so I pushed all concerns about Amy to the back burner. Life with Amy was a repeat of the previous year. She started traveling even more often and becoming more distant from all 3 of us. Lately, I began to notice that her attitude toward me was becoming condescending and dismissive. She showed me no love, no affection, nothing. Only occasionally did I receive something without any love or closeness. It was obvious that our relationship was crumbling. At the end of the year, I again attended her staff Christmas party. Our interaction with her boss was a repeat of the previous meeting. Afterward, a fleeting thought crossed my mind that she was hiding something. For the first time since we met I began to doubt her. Was there another man in her life? The thought was almost overwhelming. We had fought together as a team, overcoming many challenges to get where we were now. She wouldn't do that, would she? What was I supposed to do? I didn't go to the extreme of hiring a private investigator or hacking into her computer, but I began to observe her more closely. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Either it was my imagination or she was very clever at covering her tracks. Either way, all was not well between us. I guess I was just too busy to bother. Meanwhile, my girls were growing up rapidly. We spent a lot of time together and were very close, although, unfortunately, their mother had little time for them. Both girls were avid soccer players, so every Saturday morning during the season, I went to watch them play. It was the highlight of my week. After the game, we would go out for lunch somewhere, usually to their favorite Japanese restaurant, and chat about what they were doing. I noticed that they almost never mentioned their mother. Afterward, depending on the weather, we would walk on the beach, go to the movies, or go out with friends. After the first game of the season was over, Emma came up to me, accompanied by a new member of the soccer team. She was a charming girl, tall, absolutely beautiful with a wide smile, long dark hair, and deep dark brown eyes. She was also very athletic and had distinguished herself in her first game with Emma's team, scoring 2 goals. "Hi, Daddy, this is C.E. Can I come over and hang out with her this afternoon?" "Hi, C.E. Nice to meet you." "Sure, Emma, as long as Sai's parents don't mind." C turned and called out, "Mom, can Emma come over this afternoon?" The woman, obviously Callie's mom, turned and started walking toward us. Holy crap, she was the adult version of her daughter, and absolutely stunningly beautiful. She introduced herself as Sophie and readily agreed to have Emma come to her house in the afternoon. We chatted for a while, but I'm still not sure exactly what I said. I know I babbled incoherently. After they left, both my girls burst into laughter at my embarrassment and then smirked at each other. In the evening, Emma mentioned that Sophie was very nice. Sophie had been a single mom since Call's father died in a car accident about 3 years ago. Sophie single-handedly raised CI and her younger brother Tom for 11 years. The fact that she was a single mom definitely caught my attention. The following Saturday, as Lauren and I were watching Emma play soccer, Sophie and her son joined us and asked if they could watch with us. I mentally prepared myself to meet her again and was determined not to look foolish. We chatted during the game. She had recently moved to town for a new job and didn't know many people yet. She was very happy that Sai had made a new friend in Emma and complimented me on my good manners. After the match, Emma asked if Sai could come to our house. "Sure, Emma, that would be great if that's okay with you, Sophie." "Sure, why don't Sai come over now and have lunch with us? Do you like sushi?" "Yes, I love it." "Great, it's a deal. In fact, why don't all three of you have lunch with us?" I uttered. "Thank you so much for the invitation, Alan, but I'll be in the way of your family, so I won't be coming." I was feeling a little overwhelmed when Lauren spoke up. "No, please come, Sophie. It would be really nice to have you with us, and I'd get a woman to talk to for a change. You would be absolutely out of the way, please." She looked at me. "If you're sure I won't get in the way, Alan, that would be wonderful." I shook my head and mumbled something incoherent again. As we turned to walk to our cars, Lauren turned to me with a smirk and winked. Lunch was a great success. We, meaning mostly the four girls, chatted for almost 2 hours. I think Tom was glad of the other man's company, and we talked a bit amongst ourselves about computers and soccer. At one point, I heard Sophie very casually ask my girls if their mom ever came to watch their soccer games. Lauren's answer surprised me. "No, never. She's not really interested in us. She's only interested in her work and herself. Daddy is our mom too. He's the only one who cares about us." Sophie cast an inquisitive glance at me. During the rest of the soccer season, we got into the habit of having lunch together after every game. Emma and Sai became close friends and alternated between our houses after the game and sometimes after school. Sometimes Tom would come over with his sister too, but more often than not, he wanted to spend time with me. We often fiddled with computers, kicked a ball around, or rode bikes. I also noticed that Lauren often stopped by Sophie's house, and the two of them would sometimes go shopping and then stop for coffee and a chat. I noticed that my girls never mentioned Sophie to their mother, and neither did I. Sophie and I were becoming firm friends too. Since I was pretty much a single parent like her, it was much easier for us to help each other with parenting. After soccer season ended, we were increasingly alone with the kids on Saturdays when they went on their own field trips or to visit friends. When my wife wasn't usually around, I was pretty much free, so increasingly Sophie and I spent that time in each other's company, walking, eating lunch, or watching movies. I looked forward to our meetings more and more, and realized that I had fallen in love with her. Despite this, we never crossed the line of friendship. One day, over a cup of coffee with Sophie, I told her that I appreciated her spending time with Lauren. "You know, she's never quiet about you when she gets home, Sophie this, Sophie that." I laughed. "Well, and Tom is never quiet about you when he comes to see you. Alan this, Alan that." She laughed back. "Seriously, he needs a male figure in his life, so I appreciate you spending time with him." Then she suddenly said, "Forgive me for being blunt, Alan, but it seems pretty obvious that all is not well between you and your wife." We never discussed Amy, carefully avoiding the subject. I sat in silence for about seconds. It was a question I had long pushed to the back of my mind and avoided discussing. "The truth is, Sophie, if it weren't for the girls, I'd probably be long gone. Things have been really bad for a few years now. I've tried to talk to her many times, but I've hit a brick wall. Our marriage was hard from the beginning. I think Lauren told you about how Amy and I got married." "Yes, and she blames herself a bit for putting you in that situation. I know, it's crazy, and I tell her it's not her fault in the slightest." That opened the floodgates for me. I spent the next hour pouring out all my sorrows on Sophie. At the end, she came over and gave me a big hug. It was my first real female hug in forever. "I'm here for you whenever you need me, Alex, you know that." I only hugged her tighter and didn't let her go. Soon another year was over, and the annual Christmas party for Amy's co-workers came around again. My reacquaintance with her boss was very similar to the previous 2 years. This time, I was on high alert. Although Amy and her boss seemed much more at ease than before, something was not right. I had a definite suspicion about these two. Toward the end of the evening, Amy excused herself to go to the bathroom. After a minute, I looked over and realized that her boss was also nonchalantly heading upstairs. I decided to follow her and went upstairs looking for her. She wasn't in the bathroom, so I looked all around the huge house and was about to pass the ajar bedroom door when I heard my wife's voice inside. "Merry Christmas, dear," a male voice replied. "Merry Christmas, my love." I peeked through the crack of the door and saw Amy and her boss kissing passionately with their arms wrapped around each other. I quickly backed away in shock. I went downstairs pondering what to do. I was beyond angry, feeling just dead inside. I don't have a temper, so instead of an immediate confrontation, I calmed myself and decided to investigate and make a plan. First, Amy returned shortly afterward, a little out of breath, and spent the rest of the evening pretending to be my loving wife. I, on the other hand, pretended that nothing had happened. By New Year's Eve, working while Amy slept, I hacked into her phone and laptop. Amy should have known better. Keeping evidence on your personal computer, even if it's well hidden, isn't very smart when your husband's occupation is computer hacking. My worst fears were realized. There was a trail of evidence in her work, personal, and secret email accounts. Amy was in a long-term affair with her boss that began over 2 years ago. I also discovered photos and videos showing the depth of her betrayal. From their email correspondence, I realized that Amy and Dan had even discussed leaving their partners to be together. She seemed interested, but her lover was more cautious. I really was a clueless husband. I installed a covert surveillance program on her phone and laptop. I could remotely monitor her every electronic and physical move if I wanted to. My marriage was clearly over. Now I needed to retain custody of my daughters and protect my business and finances. In the new year, I consulted with a divorce attorney. She told me that divorces are no fault, so you can't sue for infidelity. However, in a child custody case, once the children turn, they have the right to decide which parent they want to live with after the marriage breaks up. She also came up with a strategy to protect my company from financial payouts. Emma would turn 14 in 6 months. Until then, I could tolerate living with Amy, and that gave me time to prepare. I had to keep everything a secret from Amy. I told Sophie what I had found out and she cried. It was unexpected. I thought I should be the one most upset and in need of a hug. I held her for a while as she tearfully told me that her husband had been homicidal, driving with his secretary when she went through his belongings after his passway. She discovered that they had been having an affair. This made his loss even more difficult. When she recovered, we talked more, and I told her about my plans to leave Amy. She grinned and encouraged me to put my plans into action. I first convinced my wife that since we were both making good money now, we should sell our small house and rent a bigger place while we looked for our dream home. We would use the money from the sale to put a down payment on a new house. She readily agreed. Our house sold quickly, and we rented another place nearby. I was a tenant on a lease for only 6 months. I was very sick of sharing a bed with Amy when she was home. When we moved into the rental house, I got a bad cold. I used that as an excuse to move into the spare room so I wouldn't have to sleep with her. I never moved back in, and she never commented on it. Maybe she didn't notice, or maybe she just liked it. Then I talked my father, whom I also confided in, into starting a new IT company that he himself owned. I was his only employee. I then closed my own company and started running my business through his company. Everything was going according to plan until I ran into a very nervous and scared Lauren. Lauren was dating her first boyfriend, and I immediately thought she was pregnant, just like what happened to her mom. Dad, this is hard for me to tell you, but Mom is having an affair with her boss. I was shocked that she knew and was speechless for a moment. Really, what makes you think that? Well, right after we moved, Emma and I went back to our old house to pick up some things she'd forgotten. Mom and her boss were there. Well, that's a little weird, but it doesn't prove anything, I said. I know about their affair, Lauren. I've known for a long time. Then why don't you do something about this cheating woman? Emma saw her too. Yes. I called out to Emma, who was hiding within earshot around the corner, and she bashfully entered the room. I hugged them both tightly. I knew how awful it was for them to see this, especially young Emma. Can you both keep a very big secret? They nodded. I plan on leaving your mom soon. I'm just waiting until Emma turns so you both can legally choose who to live with. They both shouted in unison. It won't be easy to keep this secret, but until then, we mustn't do anything to alert your mother. They smiled conspiratorially. Afterward, I asked Sophie to have a chat with Lauren. She had her first boyfriend now, and I didn't want her to follow in her mother's footsteps. Fortunately, Amy didn't show up often, so we could tolerate her occasional presence and keep our secret. We enjoyed it even more when she wasn't home, knowing that the end was near. We spent more and more time with Sophie and her 2 children, often having lunch at each other's houses or going out together. One Friday afternoon, when my wife was supposedly at a conference all weekend but was actually with her boss at the hotel, Lauren said, "Daddy, I'm going to babysit for Sophie today." Oh, really? What's she doing? Going to dinner with a guy at Brazier Paris, you know, that classy French restaurant in town? I immediately felt real jealousy and tried unsuccessfully not to show it. My daughter looked at me with a pitying expression on her face. "She's going on a date with you, you idiot. It's about time you two went on a proper date." "I've already made reservations, so call her now and ask her out properly," she said, holding out her phone to me. "What if she doesn't want to go on a date with me? We're just friends after all. I don't want her to feel awkward. How you ever managed to be smart enough to graduate from university is beyond me. Call her now." I called, and Sophie, judging by the sound of my voice, was absolutely thrilled and immediately agreed. Somehow I got the feeling that it wasn't a surprise. It took me 3 tries that night before my girls were satisfied that I was appropriately dressed for dinner. Just as I was about to leave, C and Tom walked in. In response to my perplexed look, Lauren said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you that they'll be spending the night here tonight. So don't worry about coming home late or not at all if you want." She smiled and handed me an already packed overnight bag. All of our children were obviously involved in a determined plot. When I arrived, Sophie met me at the door. Oh my God, she looked absolutely amazing. "Well, say something, Alan." "I can't. I have no words." "Do you like it?" she asked, twirling around. "Oh, much more than like it, Sophie. I had the best dinner of my life, and we had a wonderful time in each other's company." At the end of the evening, as we walked up to her front door, I said, "I know our children have arranged for me to stay the night, but you don't have to." She said, "Shh, I'm counting on you to stay," and led me inside and into her bedroom. I wasn't going to argue with that. We were a little shy and hesitant at first. I let out all my mental frustrations and felt like I had died and gone to heaven. The next morning, we heard the sound of lots of feet on the stairs, voices outside, and a knock on the bedroom door, which then opened. Lauren poked her head inside. "Good morning, you two. It's almost, and we got tired of waiting, so we came in. Breakfast will be ready downstairs in 20 minutes. Oh, and I'd ask if you had a good evening, but judging by the look on your face, there's no need." She grinned. Laughter was heard outside the door, and they all departed. "How did we manage to get such a wonderful group of children, Sophie?" The breakfast they made was delicious, and it was wonderful to spend it as a family. Later at home, I tried to justify myself to my girls for what had happened between Sophie and me. After all, technically, I had been unfaithful to their mother. They both just rolled their eyes and laughed at my awkwardness. "Dad, it's about time you were happy again. You're not married to Mom anymore anyway. She left you a long time ago. So, what are all you co-conspirators up to?" "Actually, we're all in agreement. Emma and I need a mother, and Cy and Tom need a father. You and Sophie are made for each other, so everyone wins. Even if I thought it was a good idea, Sophie might not." "Papa, truth. Even you should be able to tell how she feels about you and what she wants. Do I have any say in the matter?" "No, absolutely none, Daddy." From the looks on their faces, they were thoroughly amused by all of this. Now I was truly at the mercy of my daughters. A few days later, at dinner, when we were all gathered together, I announced that I intended to go house hunting the following weekend. Sophie asked what kind of house I was looking for. I wanted to be close to the beach, 2 stories with a large family room, a kid's escape room, a large backyard, and a pool. It should have at least 6 bedrooms in case my family ever grows, because you never know. Looking directly at her, I said, "I also want to make sure it will appeal to the woman I might fall head over heels in love with." Sophie stared back for a full minute, then walked over to where I was sitting and kissed me passionately in front of the children. When we took a breath, they watched us in silence, and then exploded with joy, dancing around us. I took that as a yes. After weeks of searching, we found the perfect place. We decided to buy it jointly. She used her husband's life insurance money, and I used the proceeds from the sale of my house as collateral. Everything was ready for a showdown with Amy as Emma's teach birthday, and thus D-Day, approached. Amy announced that she was leaving for days to attend a sales conference on the West Coast. I later checked her email and discovered that she was actually going on vacation with her boss to celebrate their 3rd wedding anniversary on the island of Bali in Indonesia. To avoid arousing suspicion at work, they independently told everyone that they were going on vacation with their families because they were working so hard that they were neglecting them. She would leave work a day earlier than her boss and fly to Bali alone. He would fly in a day later. She would come back to work a day earlier than her boss to make the script look believable. They were getting lazy. Their gimmicks weren't up to their usual standards, as the whole thing could easily unravel if someone checked. Amy flew off to her conference, and we immediately started packing and moving our things to our new home, where Sophie and the kids had moved a month earlier. The Balan god of vengeance, if there is such a thing, was really smiling down on me. The same night Amy arrived, a Gung volcano, an active volcano in Bali, began erupting in full force, spewing clouds of volcanic dust into the air. All air travel in and out of Bali was immediately suspended. Her lover stayed home, and Amy was stuck in Bali alone to celebrate their wedding anniversary. This is impossible to make up. I laughed so hard I almost peed my pants. The volcano continued to erupt, and all flights were still canceled, separating the lovers. Behind the scenes, I checked her emails and messages every day. To myself, the lovers were not happy, and Amy was very resentful of Dan, as if it was his fault. Every once in a while, Amy would call home and tell me how busy she was at a conference and blah blah blah. Typically, I would ask her how things were going at the hotel and ask questions about the city she was supposedly in. When I later gained remote access to her laptop, it turned out that during the phone call, she had been frantically searching the internet for information to come up with plausible answers. Meanwhile, all 6 of us were settling into our new home. I had my attorney file a separation document with the family court. I also obtained temporary custody of my girls from the court after filing their signed statements that they wanted to live with me. As the day of Amy's return approached, all flights were canceled, and I wondered how Amy would handle the situation. She called me one evening and told me that she had made a lot of connections with potential big sales leads at the conference, and her boss had asked her to follow up with them right away before she returned home. I could tell she was very nervous. It's also a good thing she didn't call on the video link, or I wouldn't have been able to contain myself. I just assured Amy that we were fine and I understood. Another week went by, and she was still stuck in Bali. I saw frantic emails and texts between the 2 lovers. Her boss informed everyone at work that she had to extend her vacation due to a family emergency. Her boss also called me and deeply apologized for causing Amy to be away from home for so long, but it was a big opportunity vital to the company, blah blah blah. I waited for his call and was ready to answer like a dutiful husband to an important working wife. I assured him that I was fine and understood. I then innocently asked him where Amy was going. He began to quickly think of places. I read Amy his letter letting her know where she needed to be. My strategy, of course, was to make her squirm and plant the seeds of doubt in her mind that she had been discovered. I kept assuring my wife when she called that I understood everything, but kept asking her about interesting places in the cities where she was staying. I knew she had researched everything beforehand, so I always asked her a few unexpected trick questions and enjoyed her attempts to give herself away. I was just playing dumb. During one call, I said, "Hey, Amy, did you read about those poor people who are stranded in Bali and can't get home because of the volcano?" There was a moment of silence, then she replied, "Oh yeah, but I didn't pay much attention to it on the news. One of my CO workers was stuck there for 2 weeks. Do you remember Paul Howard and his wife? We met them about 6 months ago. Oh yes, we're working on a project together, and he has to do his part of the work remotely via the internet from his hotel in Nadua. At least the Grand Hyatt isn't a bad place to be stuck." Amy's squeak was heard on the line. Sure enough, it was the hotel she was staying at. Paul hadn't even been to Bali, but she didn't know that. Immediately after the call, she'd moved to a cheap hotel on the other side of the island. She must have prayed she could get away with it. Of course, my 5 girls and son thought the whole farce was hilarious. Yes, Sophie's children were mine now. Finally, after almost 3 weeks, the volcano stopped erupting, and flights from Bali resumed. Amy called me to tell me that her work was over and she would be back on Friday afternoon. I was waiting for her at the airport at our rented and now vacant house. I'd planned this meeting very carefully. When she walked in, I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. She looked tired and very nervous. Oddly enough, for someone who had been on a business trip for 3 weeks, she had a deep tan. I didn't bother with the usual kiss on the cheek. "Wow, you got a great tan on your business trip. Did you even have time to do anything?" She babbled something, blushing. "Sit down and have a glass of wine with me." I poured wine into my glass and took a sip. "Alan, I'm tired. I just want to go upstairs, take a shower, and rest before dinner. I'm sorry, but we have something to discuss, and it can't wait, so please sit down. The girls are staying the night at a friend's house, so won't be disturbed." The look on Amy's face expressed genuine fear. She thought her game was finally over, and I was about to lower the boom, but she didn't know how to handle it. She reluctantly sat down, and I poured her a glass. I'd rehearsed the speech many times and honed the apologetic face. "You know, things haven't been smooth between us for a long time, Amy. Do you know why?" She looked startled and only mumbled a no. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Amy, but I can't sugarcoat it. The truth is that I've met another woman. I love her, and I want to be with her. That's why I've decided to leave you to be with her." A sudden shock struck her, and the frightened expression on her face was replaced by wordless rage. I continued, still apologizing. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It's just that you were away so often, and I got lonely. How dare you do this to me, Alan? After all I've done for you. Who is she? I assume you're entertaining her, blah blah blah." I just sat there with a sorrowful face while she poured out her anger on me for about 5 minutes. "I can see that you're very angry, and that's understandable. It's pointless to continue the conversation now. I'll come back tomorrow around 4 in the afternoon to talk some more. We have a lot to discuss." I left her there and walked back to my new home. A string of angry text messages and voicemails followed me, but I didn't bother to respond. Back home, everyone was wondering how it went. My response? Even better than expected. For dinner, we had pizza and watched a movie together. The girls turned off their phones to avoid communicating with their mother, even though I made it clear to them that they could not cut off contact with her. Why didn't I attack her for her cheating? Because it would have hurt her so much more that way. That night, Sophie and I made tender love, and all my anxiety and tension just melted away. Amy, who the next afternoon I showed up at my old place armed with a folder of papers. I was greeted by a still very annoyed Amy, along with her best friend Claire, a lawyer I had never liked. I saw old emails where CLA had encouraged Amy to continue the affair in the early days when Amy was feeling guilty and thinking about breaking up. I sat down at the table, facing both of them. CLA appeared to be the spokesperson, and offense was the best form of defense. She proceeded to tell me at length what a prick I was and what a wonderful wife and mother Amy was, how I had taken advantage of her while she was away and worked so hard for the family, how I should beg her to come back. If I didn't, she would clean me out in the divorce, take the girls, and I would never see them again. What hypocrites. After last night, they apparently decided that if I knew about her affair with her boss, I would have brought it up. I kept a sad, apologetic, and questioning look on my face. Amy, I realize how much this hurts you, but I guess I'm a little surprised that you're so angry. For quite some time, I haven't felt like you really loved me. You've been physically and emotionally absent from our marriage for the last 3 years. That's utter nonsense, Alan. Of course I've been around. I know I work hard, which often distracts me from my work, but I did it for us. So, tell me, Amy, when was the last time we made love? Amy remained silent. I can tell you it was years ago. Yes, we have physical engaging very rarely, but I was talking about making love. I can tell you the exact date of the last time. Remember years ago? You were away on a business trip and forgot to call Emma on her 5th birthday. She tried to call you several times throughout the evening but never got through. She was so upset. I remember it well. Because Emma's birthday was 2 weeks ago when you were on a business trip and you forgot to call her again. So I thought it was a bad anniversary for us. She threw me a guilty look. Ever since you came home from that trip 3 years ago, somehow our relationship has never been the same. I realized from the look on their faces that I had hit the mark. They looked very uncomfortable and squinted at each other. After all, Amy, we've been sleeping in separate bedrooms for about 6 months now. It doesn't seem to bother you. I can't remember the last time we went out together or went on vacation. It feels like you spend your vacations at work. They both shuddered. When you're home, you're not here with me and your girls. I smiled inwardly as I watched them squirm in their seats. Anyway, Amy, I'm sorry, but I'm going to move on with my life, and I hope for the girls' sake we can make our separation as easy as possible. Reconciliation is really impossible. Who is she? Do I know her? You've met her daughter C, Emma's best friend, a few times. Her mom Sophie and I met at Saturday soccer last year and became friends. I think our friendship grew until we realized we were in love with each other. We had an affair and recently decided to move in together. Before they could say anything else, I placed a large index folder on the table. I've gathered some documents and information for you. Tab A is the separation agreement I filed with the court 2 weeks ago. Tab B is the divorce petition you need to sign. The sooner you sign, the sooner we can move forward. Tab C is the proposed financial settlement. Tab D is the new lease on this house. The lease expires in weeks, so you will have to renew it in your name if you want to stay. Tab E contains all the utility contracts. I gave notice to terminate the agreements in weeks. If you want to stay, you will have to renew them in your name. Tab F has the bank statements. I have withdrawn 60% of the funds from our joint accounts. The credit cards in your name now belong to you. Finally, Tab G is a temporary court order for custody and child support. The girls have decided to move in with me, so custody will be handled by me. Child support will be paid directly from your paycheck at work. Access to visitation has been left open so we can work this out as we see fit. They were stunned that I was so well prepared. Claire began, "You creep. You've been planning this for ages. You're not going to get away with this. We're going to take your IT company, your girls, and your money." Well, yeah, I've been planning this since Christmas. I had an epiphany at your staff Christmas party, Amy. I realized it was over between us, and it was time to act. I watched Amy frantically trying to remember what had happened there. So, selling the house to buy another was a shame, CLA said. I only smiled. As for screwing me, Claire, I don't have a company to take over. I closed it down a few months ago. I work for someone else now. I bought a new house for Sophie to live in after I filed for legal separation, so it's not an asset to our marriage. Since I have legal custody of the girls, I can use 60% of the money from the sale of the house to buy a new home, so I'm not sure what you can really do. Claire, by the way, if you research state laws, you'll find that once the children turn 14, they can choose who they want to live with. They chose me. You really are nothing, Alan. I bet you poisoned the girls' minds against Amy. I wouldn't do that. I'm not such a scoundrel. Anyway, even if I thought I should poison them, it wouldn't have been necessary. Amy did it herself, having neglected them for the last 3 years. You have a lot of work to do with them, Amy, to get them back. It's important for their well-being that they have a good relationship with their mother. She hasn't neglected them. She's a good mother. It's not what they think, Claire. She's been virtually absent from their lives for years. Amy, ask yourself who feeds them, who takes them to sports, who makes their school lunches, who helps them with their homework, who buys them clothes, who always remembers their birthdays and buys them presents, who goes to the movies with them, who do they go to with problems, who help them get through their first period, who gives them love and affection. I could go on and on. Well, Amy fell silent. It was obvious that she was having a hard time digesting what had happened. The girls asked me to see if you would meet them tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the Beachside Cafe. It was actually my idea since they really don't want to meet you. I'll tell them it's okay. She only nodded. I left them both and went back to my family. The next day, the girls told me that Amy kept bad-mouthing me and demanding that they live with her. Eventually, the girls excused themselves to go to the bathroom and just quietly left. I couldn't understand why she wanted to make up. She had been indifferent to me for years. Maybe I was just a convenient babysitter and housekeeper for her. When Alan told me he was leaving for another woman, I was in complete shock. I thought he loved me. Despite several attempts to reconcile, he wanted nothing to do with me, and we only communicated when exchanging our daughters for visits. My girls were openly hostile, making visits unpleasant. They would happily run to their new stepmother, which infuriated me. Eventually, I told them not to come unless they wanted to. I had envisioned my life continuing as it had, my lover on the road and my husband at home. Alan leaving was a huge shock and emotional blow. Over time, I realized he was right. I had been an absent wife, focusing all my love and emotional energy on Dan for the last years, leaving almost nothing for Alan. It was surprising he stayed as long as he did. Unable to afford my house and child support, I moved into a tiny apartment, spending nights alone watching TV and eating takeout. Dan's attitude changed when Alan left me. He became too busy with his family to spend time with me, sending me on business trips alone and saying I could handle the clients. Our emotional connection faded. 6 months after my marriage ended, Dan announced he was moving to another city for a new job. Tearfully, I asked him to never contact me again. Suddenly, I was a divorced woman. I couldn't help but think of the line from a Joni Mitchell song, "You don't know what you've got until it's gone." I foolishly thought I could have it all. Alan was now with a beautiful woman who was impossible to hate, and he was glowing with happiness, just like he was when we were young. My girls were much happier, too, treating Sophie as their mother and seeing me as an annoying relic of their past. It was very painful. I hit rock bottom when I complained to my girls about my situation, and Lauren looked at me coldly. "So, did you leave your father after all?" I know I wasn't the perfect wife and was neglectful, but he left me for another woman. "Mom, he left you because you had an affair with your boss for 3 years. The look on my face said it all. I was so ashamed. Alan had known all along but hadn't said anything. My life was a mess. I had lost a good husband and my daughters. True to his word, Alan advised our girls to keep in touch with me. Gradually, they began visiting willingly and sometimes stayed overnight. One evening, as I drove the girls to their new home, I asked Alan for a chat. We got out of the car and I faced him. "Lauren told me you know about Dan and me." "I'm sorry, Alan. You were a good husband, and you didn't deserve this. I was selfish and got what I deserved." He nodded. "Why didn't you tell me you knew, Alan? Maybe you could have stopped me in time." "By the time I found out, it was too late." "When did you find out?" "I caught you with your boss at the office Christmas party last year. After that, I did some digging and found out everything. I have to admit it amused me when you were stuck in Bali alone. Oh God, I feel miserable. Why didn't you confront me?" "I was angry and wanted you to feel my resentment. I found out you're not the first secretary your boss has slept with. He has a history of using and dumping women. I decided the best way to punish you was to stay quiet and let things unfold. If I made a scene, his wife might divorce him, freeing him to be with you. I figured you'd feel worse if you thought I left you for another woman. Your strategy worked perfectly. My life is a mess. I'm sorry you were hurt so badly. Well, a little sorry. You don't need to apologize. It was my fault. If you had done what I did, I would have walked away from you. Looking back, I was seduced by excitement and became dependent to it. I tried to stop early on, but it was too late. I became obsessed and forgot about you and our girls. For a while, my anger has subsided, Amy, and I forgive you. I've also become philosophical about it. After all, I wouldn't be with Sophie now if you hadn't cheated on me. Yes, I know. That's what hurts the most. Our marriage was challenging from the start. Sophie, I don't think you're a bad person. You made a big mistake, but he was a skilled manipulator. You didn't have a chance to fully mature and experience normal teenage life, including dating and figuring out who you wanted to be with. You were vulnerable, and your boss took advantage. You're probably right, Alan, but why did you have to tell the girls about him? It was too harsh, no wonder they hated me. I didn't tell them, Amy. They found out themselves. What, they came back to our old house unexpectedly and caught you both in the living room. Remember? Just after we moved out. I couldn't recall at first. Then the memory hit me with horror. What did they see? Pretty much everything, even Emma. Lauren described it to me in detail. My body tensed with shame and I burst into tears, leaning into Alan's comforting embrace. He held me tightly, consoling me as I sobbed into his chest. Eventually, he carried me inside and laid me on the couch. Sophie and everyone else were kind and supportive, urging me to stay and join them for dinner. Seeing Alan happy with his new family, I felt the weight of my mistakes as I walked out to the car that evening. He put both hands on my shoulders. Amy, don't keep blaming yourself. We faced challenges from a young age, becoming parents and committing to each other. Our marriage lasting 14 years is a testament to both of us. Look at the positives. Our mistakes brought us 2 wonderful daughters, a legacy that can never be taken away. You're right, Alan. Speaking of mistakes, I've made another. Sophie is pregnant, so we're getting married sooner than planned. You seem prone to mistakes. You're a good man and a good husband, Alan. Better than I deserved. I wish you well. I hugged him and kissed his cheek before leaving, feeling regretful. Why did I forgive her so easily? For several reasons. Because holding on to hate can consume you and embitter you, because she was enduring a form of punishment just by seeing me with Sophie. There was still a lingering bond between us despite everything. Although I initially wanted to punish Amy, my true revenge was aimed at her boss Dan, who had seduced her away from me. I hacked into his computer and sent him an email disguised as Amy containing a hidden Trojan horse that granted me full access. I uncovered evidence that he had been embezzling from his former and current employers. I gathered substantial proof and anonymously sent it to both companies and the authorities. At his trial, he pleaded guilty and received a 1-year prison sentence. Throughout the trial, his wife stood by him, but after I showed her incriminating evidence of his numerous affairs, she ended their relationship on the spot. To complete my revenge, I visited Dan in prison. Initially, he didn't recognize me. Hi, Dan, we've met before. I'm Amy's ex-husband. What the hell do you want, prick? To deliver a message. The first one is from Amy. She sends her regards and hopes you're enjoying your new accommodations, which I helped you settle into personally. What you really should have hired professionals to encrypt your computer. It took me only 15 minutes to unlock everything after I hacked into it. I couldn't resist forwarding it all to the police. After he finished cursing at me, I continued. Also, I hope you don't mind, but I paid a visit to your wife and showed her all those compromising photos and videos I found of you and your mistresses. Needless to say, she was livid. She insisted on getting even, and I couldn't refuse. I don't understand why she wasn't enough for you. Nonsense. She wanted me to show you these. I spread the photos out in front of him. They had been doctored with Photoshop, but he didn't know that. She said to tell you that she'll never visit you here again, and you'll never see your children. I gave her the name of my lawyer who will handle her divorce from your sorry bum. The expression on his face was priceless. Yes, revenge is indeed a dish best served cold.
Looking back, I don't even know the exact moment things started feeling off. But if I had to pick a point, it'd be those late nights, the ones where I'd roll over half awake, expecting to see Kira sleeping beside me like she used to. Except now, more often than not, she was facing the other way, her face lit up by that damn phone screen. I know it sounds stupid, but there was a time I'd give anything to see her smile, to see her happy. Lately, though, it was like I was looking at a stranger who happened to look like my wife. Her grin wasn't the soft one she'd had for years with me. It was sharp, private, like she was letting someone else in on some joke I'd never get to hear. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who starts making something out of nothing. But night after night, there she was lost in her little world, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. I'd turn over, pretending to be asleep, but that feeling of her slipping away got stronger every time. Kira used to tell me everything. I mean, we'd had our problems like any other couple, but there wasn't a time when she didn't talk about her day, even the boring stuff. But suddenly, every conversation started feeling filtered. She'd throw around these half-baked excuses. Oh, just the girls again, or sorry, babe, it's work. I'd nod along, trying not to overthink it. But when you've been with someone that long, you know when they're lying. Or maybe not outright lying, but hiding something. Every girls' night out added another stone to this pile in my gut that told me something was going wrong. Then there was this night I remember like it happened 5 minutes ago. I'd woken up around 2 a.m., and there she was, laughing at something on her phone. I didn't even have to look twice. She was beaming, smiling in this way she hadn't around me in forever. I just lay there, frozen, pretending to be asleep, but feeling more awake than I'd felt in weeks. Who was making her smile like that? I wanted to reach over, grab her phone, and get the truth out of her right then and there. But what if I was just being paranoid? I didn't have anything real to go on, just my own insecurities, right? Things changed between us in ways I'd never thought possible. She was always too tired or not in the mood. I get it, life wears you down, but this wasn't just some rough patch. She'd pull away from me like even being close was too much. Every time I tried to bring it up, she brushed it off like I was the one imagining things. But I wasn't. The woman I loved was right next to me, but every night, it was like she was further away than ever. It was all these little things that started adding up. One day, Kira's talking about some inside joke she had with work friends. I'm sitting there, nodding, trying to act like everything's normal. But when I asked for details, she clammed up. I could see it. She didn't want me in on the joke. And then one day, she's laughing at some private message that pops up. I asked her what was so funny, but she just smiled, shrugged, and changed the topic. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just feeling like an outsider. She was making me one. One of the weirdest parts was how even my friends started noticing things. Sam, one of my oldest buddies from work, casually mentioned seeing her around town with a guy he thought looked familiar. Sam's one of those guys who wouldn't pry even if he walked in on someone mid-affair, so he laughed it off, saying he must have been mistaken. But that offhand comment hit me hard. Now, every time Kira had an excuse to be away, every girls' night out, or late meeting, my mind went to dark places. Who the hell was she really with? And then, almost like fate was dropping hints I wasn't asking for, things got even stranger. The thing that really set me off was Waylon. He was always a bit too friendly with Kira, a little too quick to jump up and grab her a drink at gatherings, laugh at her jokes like she was the funniest person in the room. But it wasn't until that one weekend that I really started to wonder. We were all out with friends, and I noticed Waylon's eyes on her a bit longer than they should have been. He'd linger around her, listen too intently, laugh too hard. It was subtle, but once I'd noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. At that point, every glance, every shared laugh between them felt like a punch to the gut. I wasn't ready to admit it yet, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. After the whole Waylon being too attentive episode, I started wondering if I was the only one seeing this. There had to be someone else who noticed the way he hung around Kira like some damn lapdog. And that's when it hit me. Lena, his wife. She was always right there, and I wondered if she'd seen the same things I had. For a while, I let the thought sit. Bringing it up to her felt risky. I wasn't sure if she'd noticed anything or if I'd come off looking like a paranoid idiot. But that feeling of something lurking under the surface wasn't going away. I decided to reach out. One afternoon, I texted her, something casual. Just a, hey, you've noticed Waylon and Kira seem pretty close, right? I tried to keep it light, just in case. But Lena's response? It was almost instant. She replied, funny, I was just thinking the same thing. My heart was pounding. What started as casual texts about their behavior slowly turned into something more serious. With every message, it was like peeling back a layer on this mess we were both finding ourselves in. I could tell she was as frustrated and in the dark as I was. And hell, it was a weird comfort, knowing I wasn't losing my mind alone. Lena and I started texting regularly after that. It was strange, this unspoken understanding between us. We both felt isolated, stuck in these marriages where something was obviously wrong, but neither of us knew exactly what we were dealing with. Our conversations turned into our own secret. She'd tell me about Waylon's late nights and business dinners, and I'd fill her in on Kira's excuses about girls' nights that always seemed to fall on the same nights. Each little story felt like another piece of a puzzle we weren't sure we wanted to solve, but at this point, we didn't have a choice. Then came the night it all unraveled. Lena texted me around 8 p.m., saying Waylon had just left for one of those so-called work meetings. The timing lined up perfectly. Kira had just told me she'd be working late at the office. I felt a pit in my stomach, knowing that this might be our chance to finally see what was happening. Lena and I agreed to meet up and follow them. It felt insane, like something out of a bad detective movie, but at this point, I needed to know. We parked near the office where Kira supposedly was and watched from a distance. Not even 10 minutes passed before we saw her walk out, glancing around nervously, and then Waylon pulled up. Watching her get into his car felt like a punch to the gut. We followed them, silent in the car, as they drove across town, eventually stopping in front of a hotel. They went in together, laughing. I couldn't believe it, and from the look on Lena's face, neither could she. When they disappeared into the hotel, Lena and I just sat there. She broke down, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. I didn't know what to say or do. My anger was boiling over, but I tried to keep it in check, focusing on comforting her. I could barely believe what I was seeing myself, let alone deal with someone else's pain. I wanted to punch something, throw something, anything to release this fire inside me. But sitting in that car, the two of us in shared silence and misery, it felt like some messed up kind of bond. We both knew we needed proof, something undeniable. I snapped a few photos of them leaving the hotel together. As I held my phone, framing the shots, I felt like I was betraying a life I'd spent years building. Here I was, documenting my wife's affair, recording the end of our marriage in real time. Lena looked over at me as I took the photos, her face a mix of pain and determination. It was a sad reality, but we both knew these pictures would be our shield when the time came for a confrontation. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the scenes in my head. Kira's smile when she got into Waylon's car, the way they laughed together, and Lena's tear-streaked face beside me. Everything felt twisted and wrong, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Kira finally came home hours later, tiptoeing through the door. I pretended to be asleep, not ready to face her, not without those pictures to ground me. The next morning, I tried bringing up her late night. I kept it casual, masking my voice as best I could. "So, how was work last night?" I asked, pouring coffee like nothing was wrong. She barely looked at me, brushing off my question with, "Oh, just the usual." Her eyes flickered, though, and I knew she was lying. When I pressed a bit, she snapped, asking why I was being so nosy. The irritation in her voice, the way she looked at me like I was some annoying stranger instead of her husband, was infuriating. But I kept calm. After all, I wasn't ready to tip my hand just yet. Instead, I just nodded, pretending to accept her excuse, though every part of me was screaming to confront her. I wanted to throw those pictures in her face, to make her see the pain she'd put me through. But something held me back. Maybe it was the thought of Lena and the plan we were quietly starting to piece together. After that night at the hotel, Lena and I couldn't let it go. We'd been texting almost nonstop, venting, sharing every little betrayal we'd noticed over the years, piecing together just how deep this affair had gone. We both knew confronting them wasn't enough. Not after everything we'd seen. We wanted to make them feel the sting, make them live with the anxiety of knowing they'd been caught, unsure of when it would all come crashing down. We decided to meet up in person, somewhere secluded where we could talk openly. I picked a quiet spot at a park on the edge of town, the kind of place no one from our circle would ever go to. When Lena arrived, I could see that same fire in her eyes that had been burning in me for days now. We sat on a bench overlooking a pond, and it felt surreal sitting there with Waylon's wife, plotting a way to expose my own wife's betrayal. We went back and forth on how we'd do it. Should we throw it in their faces at a family gathering? Or maybe keep dropping hints until they couldn't take it anymore? Every idea sounded like something out of a bad soap opera, and yet here we were, laughing at the irony of it all. We shared stories of Kira's and Waylon's ridiculous excuses, the moments we'd each caught them in their lies, the times we'd tried to believe them even when we knew deep down they weren't telling the truth. Somewhere in all that anger and frustration, there was something else. Sitting there with Lena, feeling her shoulder brush against mine, her laughter echoing in my ears, I felt a pull, a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. I guess when you go through something like this together, you either fall apart or find a strange kind of comfort in each other. It wasn't planned, and it sure as hell wasn't smart, but before I knew it, We were leaning in, our lips meeting in a kiss that was equal parts anger and desperation. It was like all the pain and betrayal and everything we bottled up finally had an outlet. We didn't talk about it afterward. There wasn't much to say. But from that moment, it felt like we were in this together, truly, and nothing would stop us from seeing it through. Our first real move came at a dinner with our usual group of friends. Kira and I arrived together, the picture of a happy couple, as fake as it felt. I spotted Lena across the table, her expression calm, collected, almost too calm. At one point during the evening, she casually mentioned to the group, "You know, I've always had this knack for telling when someone's hiding something." She let her words hang in the air, looking around the table with a knowing smile. I watched as Waylon shifted uncomfortably, glancing over at Kira, who suddenly looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. They were both squirming, and I couldn't help the satisfaction that crept in, knowing they were on edge. The tension between them didn't go unnoticed. A few of our friends exchanged glances, sensing the weird vibe. No one asked outright, but I could tell some of them were starting to wonder what was going on. That subtle tension was exactly what we wanted, a small taste of the paranoia we knew would only get worse from here. Lena took it a step further by arranging a casual get-together with some of our mutual friends. The plan was simple, just enough hints to keep Kira and Waylon on edge without outright exposing them. Throughout the evening, she'd drop little comments, barely noticeable to anyone who didn't know the truth, but enough to keep our two cheaters squirming. "It's funny," she'd say, "how some people think they can keep secrets forever. But the truth always has a way of coming out." Each time, Kira's smile would falter, and Waylon would suddenly need to refill his drink or look away. It wasn't long before our friends started picking up on the strange tension. A couple of them even asked if everything was okay with Kira and me, and I just shrugged, saying we were going through a rough patch. It was a simple answer, but it planted the seeds, making them pay a bit more attention, watch a little closer. That was the beauty of our plan. The longer we kept it up, the more everyone else would see the cracks forming, even if they didn't know why. The real test, though, came during a double date Lena and I set up with Kira and Waylon. It was bold, risky even, but we wanted them to sweat, to feel the walls closing in. We met at a small, cozy restaurant, the kind of place where couples go for quiet dinners, and from the start the tension was thick. Lena and I played our roles perfectly, acting casual but throwing in just enough knowing glances, enough subtle hints to keep them wondering what we knew. At one point, Lena leaned over to Waylon, her voice just loud enough for Kira and me to hear, and said, "It's strange, isn't it? How some things don't stay hidden forever. Almost like fate has a way of making the truth come out." Waylon froze, his face pale as he exchanged a nervous glance with Kira. She looked down at her plate, visibly tense, and I could almost feel her trying to hold herself together. The rest of the night was a game of mental warfare. Every shared glance, every carefully chosen word was meant to unnerve them, to make them feel like the world was closing in. I watched Kira, seeing her nervous glances at Waylon, the way she fidgeted with her napkin, and it was all I could do not to laugh. They were both a mess, and it was exactly what they deserved. By the end of the night, Lena and I had pushed them to the edge without saying a single explicit word about what we knew. They left the restaurant looking like they'd been through hell, and I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. The party was the perfect setting for the next phase of our plan. It was a big gathering, a mix of friends and family, and exactly the kind of place where whispers could take on a life of their own. Lena and I arrived separately, keeping our distance at first, acting like we were just two people in the same room. Nothing more. But we had a plan, and tonight we were done with subtle hints. Tonight, we were going to put the pressure on. The first strike came from Lena. She found her way into a conversation with Kira and a couple of other friends. I watched from across the room as she started weaving her story, her face a perfect mask of casual curiosity. "Oh, I heard the craziest thing," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw a few more people in. "My friend recently found out her husband was cheating on her. Apparently, she had no idea for years, and then she just stumbled upon the evidence." Kira's reaction was almost too good. I could see her eyes darting around, her hands fidgeting as she forced a tight smile. When Lena went into the details, painting a picture of this friend and how she discovered everything. Kira's face grew paler by the second. She glanced over at Waylon, who was across the room, and I knew she was wondering if this was all just a coincidence or if Lena was onto her. But that was only the beginning. Later in the night, I made sure to plant my own little seed of doubt. Kira had come over to ask me something, and I casually unlocked my phone in front of her, scrolling as if I was looking for something. There, in plain sight, was a photo of her and Waylon leaving the hotel together. I acted like it was just another picture, flipping past it before she could get a good look. But I saw her face freeze, her eyes locked on the screen. I pretended not to notice, casually slipping my phone back into my pocket and carrying on with the conversation like nothing had happened. The rest of the party was like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. I could see Kira whispering to Waylon, her face tense as she tried to keep her voice down. Meanwhile, Lena and I exchanged glances across the room, small, knowing smiles that only added to their paranoia. We didn't have to say a word. Just being there, exchanging those looks, was enough to make them sweat. Friends started picking up on the tension too. A couple of them came over, asking if everything was all right with Kira and me, if there was something going on. I shrugged, playing it cool, and just hinted that we'd been having a rough time. It wasn't a lie, technically, but it was just vague enough to keep the rumor mill turning. Every little look, every slight touch between Lena and me added fuel to the fire, and soon enough, the room was buzzing with questions, whispers that Kira and Waylon couldn't ignore. Lena didn't let up, either. At one point, she found herself alone with Waylon in the kitchen. I didn't catch the whole conversation, but I saw enough. She leaned in close, her voice low, and murmured something to him that made his face drain of all color. I heard her say something about how she knew more than she was letting on. Waylon shot her a panicked look, his eyes darting around to make sure no one else was listening. After that, he was glued to Kira's side, pulling her into hushed conversations and glancing nervously around the room, as if expecting someone to jump out and expose them at any moment. It was almost too much fun watching them unravel. Every time Lena and I exchanged a glance, they looked more and more shaken, as if the ground beneath them was starting to crack. By the end of the night, we'd pushed them to their breaking point without even having to confront them directly. As the party started winding down, Lena and I decided to dial up the jealousy factor. We both noticed the way Kira and Waylon couldn't keep their eyes off us, watching every interaction with growing unease. So, I leaned in a bit closer to Lena, making a point to laugh at something she said, resting my hand casually on her shoulder. She played along perfectly, tilting her head toward me, letting her hand linger on my arm. It was just enough to set them off, making them wonder if we were onto them, and if we'd moved onto each other in the process. I caught Kira staring at us, her face a mixture of shock and anger, and when our eyes met, she quickly looked away, trying to mask her reaction. Waylon didn't fare any better. He looked like he was on the verge of confronting us, but every time he took a step in our direction, he'd hesitate, his confidence crumbling. They were both too afraid to make a scene, too unsure of what we knew and what we'd do next. As we left the party, Lena gave me one last look, a smirk that told me we'd done exactly what we'd set out to do. Kira and Waylon were left in a mess of their own making, paranoid, confused, and completely off balance. The family gathering was the moment we'd been working toward, the grand finale we'd meticulously planned, fueled by every ounce of betrayal and frustration we'd bottled up. Kira and I arrived separately, as did Lena and Waylon, each of us pretending to blend into the crowd, but we knew the night would end with all eyes on them. As the evening wore on, my pulse started pounding, knowing what was coming. The room was full, relatives, close friends, people who'd known Kira and me for years. It was surreal, standing among them, knowing I was about to drop a bomb that would change everything. When the moment felt right, I cleared my throat and took a deep breath. "Hey, everyone," I began, loud enough for the entire room to go quiet. I felt dozens of eyes on me, the room shifting its focus. I could see Kira's face from across the room, a look of confusion and a flicker of dread. Waylon was next to her, frozen, his forced smile faltering. "I know this isn't exactly what you all expected tonight," I continued, forcing calm into my voice. But there's something I need to get off my chest. I could feel the tension rising, could see Kira's hand reaching for Waylon's, and knew they were preparing for the worst. Then I said it. For the past several months, Kira and Waylon have been having an affair. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a stunned silence. I took out my phone, my hand surprisingly steady, and held up the screen, showing the photos of them leaving the hotel together, unmistakable evidence that silenced any doubt. I flipped through them slowly, making sure everyone saw exactly what Kira and Waylon had been doing behind our backs. The silence was electric, and I could see Kira's face pale as she stumbled backward, speechless. Waylon looked equally shell-shocked, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for something to say, but finding nothing. Then Lena stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "I just want everyone to know how much this has hurt," she began, her eyes glistening with tears. "Waylon was my husband, my partner, and he destroyed everything we built together." She held up her own phone, showing text messages, each one more damning than the last. Every message, every picture added another layer to their shame, painting a picture of betrayal so raw and undeniable that no one could look away. The reactions in the room were immediate. Relatives exchanged horrified glances, friends shook their heads in disgust. A few people, longtime family friends, openly criticized them. "How could you do this to Randall?" "To Lena," someone demanded. Another friend scoffed, saying, "I can't believe I trusted you both." I watched as Kira's face went through a spectrum of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, desperate fear. She managed to pull herself together just enough to approach me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Randall, please," she whispered, clutching at my arm. "We can work through this. You have to believe me, it didn't mean anything." I let her words hang there, hollow and pathetic. I could feel her fingers tightening around my arm, but I stayed still, feeling strangely calm as I looked her straight in the eyes. "It's over, Kira. I'm done." My voice was steady, final. She broke down, her face crumbling, and it was all I could do to keep from feeling a small pang of pity, but it was buried under too much anger, too much betrayal. Across the room, Waylon was trying his own version of damage control. He went around, muttering to friends, trying to explain himself, but it was useless. People turned away, their faces hard and unforgiving. His desperation was almost pitiful, but I couldn't find it in myself to care. He was reaping what he'd sown, and no amount of excuses could salvage what he'd destroyed. By the end of the night, Kira and Waylon stood alone, shunned by nearly everyone in the room. Lena and I left together, stepping out into the cool night air, leaving them to deal with the fallout of their own betrayal. There was nothing left to say. The truth was out, and we'd finally taken back control. In the weeks following that unforgettable family gathering, everything in my life took on a new clarity. It was like someone had pulled the veil off, exposing the raw truth I'd been avoiding for far too long. Lena and I, scarred and battered, had come out on the other side of the wreckage, and somehow, against all odds, we'd found something real in each other. It was a strange twist of fate, almost poetic really. The two people left behind had discovered each other, not through shared love but through shared pain. One evening, we were sitting on the porch at my place, the warm evening air settling in around us as we watched the sun sink low on the horizon. It had been a quiet day, one of those rare moments of peace that had become foreign to me. As we sat there, talking about everything and nothing, the conversation took a deeper turn. We started talking about our future, not just where we saw ourselves in a year or two, but our dreams, our hopes, the things we'd let slip away while wrapped up in our broken marriages. "We've both got a second chance here," Lena said softly, her gaze fixed on the fading colors of the sunset. "I don't want to waste it. I want something real this time." There was a vulnerability in her voice that hit me hard. I realized then how much I wanted the same thing. We talked for hours, late into the night, about what we valued, what mattered most to us now. Trust sat at the center of it all. Trust and honesty. We'd both seen firsthand what secrets could do, how they could corrode even the strongest bonds. And as the night wore on, we promised each other that, no matter what happened, We'd keep things transparent, even if the truth was hard to hear. Meanwhile, Kira wasn't ready to let go. She showed up at my door a couple of times, as if she believed she could somehow smooth over the wreckage she'd left in her wake. The first time, I opened the door, and there she was looking like she'd barely slept, her face streaked with what looked like fresh tears. "Randall, please," she started, her voice trembling. "Can we talk? I made a mistake. I know I did, but can we fix this?" Looking at her, all I could feel was a strange numbness. The desperation in her voice, her apologies, they didn't stir the emotions they once might have. Instead, it felt empty, like she was reading from a script she didn't believe in. I listened to her ramble on about regret, about how it didn't mean anything, about how we could find our way back if I'd just give her another chance. But when she finally paused, waiting for me to respond, all I could say was, "Kira, it's over. There's nothing left to fix." Her face crumbled at my words, and for a brief moment, I almost felt a pang of pity. Almost. But the betrayal ran too deep, the damage too irreversible. After that, she tried reaching out through messages, her tone swinging from pleading to accusatory. At first, it was more apologies, promises to change, to be better. But when I didn't respond, her tone changed, bitterness seeping through every word. She started blaming me, as if somehow my actions had driven her into Waylon's arms. It was laughable, really, but more than that, it was exhausting. I blocked her number, needing to finally shut the door on that part of my life for good. In the midst of all this, our mutual friends rallied around Lena and me. They were shocked by what had happened, just as blindsided as we'd been. Many reached out, offering their support, their condolences, and more than a few shared that they'd seen little things here and there, small signs they hadn't wanted to believe were real. One friend, Brian, confessed over a coffee that he'd caught Waylon acting a bit too familiar with Kira at a few parties but had brushed it off, thinking it was just harmless friendliness. Now, though, he apologized profusely, reassuring me that he'd have my back and urging me to find some peace and happiness with Lena. Slowly, openly, Lena and I began dating. It felt different from anything I'd experienced before, like we were starting with a clean slate. There was no facade, no secrets, just two people who'd been through hell and were ready for something genuine. The first time I held her hand in public, it felt strange but right, like the first real connection I'd had in a long time. We'd go on long walks, sometimes talking about everything, sometimes walking in comfortable silence. And each time we were together, I felt the weight of the past lifting little by little. One evening, after a long day at work, we found ourselves curled up on my couch, her head resting on my shoulder, her fingers lightly tracing circles on the back of my hand. The silence between us was easy, comfortable, and I found myself savoring the quiet. She looked up at me, her gaze warm but serious. "No more secrets, right?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "None," I promised, my voice soft but sure. "I'm in it with every fiber of my being." We both knew too well how corrosive secrets could be, how they could destroy even the most sacred bonds. I knew I wanted no part of that life again, and I could see the same resolve in her eyes. As we walked hand in hand down the street one evening, the cool night air settling around us, it struck me just how far we'd come. We'd both been shattered by the people we thought we'd spend forever with. And yet, here we were, stronger, rebuilding from the ashes. We stopped at the end of the streetlights casting a soft glow, and I turned to her, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of hope, of excitement for what lay ahead. "Here's to new beginnings," I said, my voice filled with a conviction I hadn't known I could still feel. She smiled, squeezing my hand. To trust, honesty, and finally letting go of the past. And with that, we walked into the future together, both of us ready to leave the weight of betrayal and heartbreak behind. This wasn't just a rebound or a way to fill the void. This was something real, built on mutual respect, shared pain, and a promise to never make the same mistakes our exes had made. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was genuinely looking forward to what was next.
I pulled into the driveway after a long day at work. The house was quiet, but but as I walked inside, I caught the faint sound of my wife talking softly on the phone. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial, and she didn't notice me at first. I stood in the hallway for a moment, just listening. I wasn't suspicious, just curious. Who was on the other end of the line, and why was she speaking in such a hushed tone? When she finally noticed me, she smiled, waved briefly, and quickly ended the call with a casual, "All right, talk soon." She hung up, turned to me, and said, "We've got a bit of a situation." I set my bag down and gave her a nod, signaling her to go on. She explained that her friend Emily had started dating a guy named Desi. Apparently, he was a professional poker player who made his living traveling from tournament to tournament. Their relationship was new, spontaneous even, and not without its awkward moments. Emily had asked my wife to come along and support her during dinner with Desi. She framed it as a moral support mission, a way to make things less uncomfortable. My wife was clearly invested in helping Emily out, and I respected that. "Why don't we just make it a double date then?" I suggested casually. It seemed like an easy fix. My wife laughed lightly and said it was a nice idea but not the right time. Desi had already booked a table, and adding another couple would throw off the dynamic. "You've given me something to think about for the future, though," she added before heading upstairs to get ready. When she came back down, I couldn't help but notice how dressed up she was. Her outfit was polished, her makeup flawless, and she moved with an extra layer of confidence. "You look like you're walking onto a runway," I said with a smirk. She rolled her eyes and told me not to be ridiculous. I offered to drive her, but she declined, saying Emily would be picking her up. That stuck out to me. It would have been simpler for me to drop her off, but I didn't press the issue. About 10 minutes later, Emily's car pulled up. My wife waved goodbye, climbed in, and they drove off. I stood by the window for a moment, watching the taillights disappear down the street. Something about the whole situation lingered in my mind, but I shrugged it off. There was no sense in sitting around overthinking things, so I decided to head over to a friend's place to watch the basketball game. When I arrived, the guys were already deep into a heated discussion about a recent game. We grabbed a few beers, settled into the worn-out couches, and let the game fill the silence. During halftime, one of the guys shared a story about a time he'd played poker in some dingy bar downtown. "I lost everything to this old woman," he said with a dramatic sigh. "I had to drop my chips and bolt before she cleaned me out completely." We all burst out laughing. In the middle of our laughter, my phone buzzed. It was a photo of my wife, Emily, and Desi all sitting together at the restaurant. They were smiling, drinks in hand, and everything looked perfectly normal. But then I noticed something, a bracelet on my wife's wrist. It wasn't a cheap piece of jewelry, either. It was something elegant, something expensive. And I was certain she hadn't been wearing it when she left the house. Emily was never one to splurge on accessories. Makeup? Sure. Designer handbags? Sometimes. But expensive jewelry? No. And more importantly, my wife hadn't been wearing that bracelet earlier in the evening. It wasn't ours, and it wasn't something she'd casually pick up. The detail stuck with me, like a splinter in the back of my mind. I told myself I'd ask her about it when she got home. When I returned home later that night, my wife was already back. Emily was there too, and the two of them were talking animatedly in the living room. Their conversation stopped abruptly when I walked in. I greeted them both and headed to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. I wasn't in the mood for small talk, and I certainly wasn't going to start questioning her in front of her friend. Eventually, Emily said her goodbyes and left. As soon as the door clicked shut behind her, I turned to my wife. "Where's the bracelet?" I asked. She paused for a moment, then walked over to the side table, opened a drawer, and pulled it out. "This one?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. I nodded. She explained that it was a gift from Emily, a very old bracelet that had been collecting dust in her jewelry box. Emily had apparently wanted to thank her for being such a good friend and supporter. My wife even showed me an old photo of Emily wearing the bracelet years ago, along with a screenshot of their conversation where Emily had asked if she liked it. I let out a slow breath and nodded. The explanation made sense, and there wasn't anything else to dig into. "All right," I said. "Forget it. I must be more tired than I thought." My wife smirked and asked if I had actually thought it was a gift from Desi, or worse, that it was some kind of romantic gesture. "Of course not," I said firmly. She shook her head with a knowing smile and then changed the subject. "Speaking of Desi, there's something else I need to tell you. You're going to love this." I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, and listened. Apparently, Desi had asked both her and Emily to help him organize a poker tournament. He was new to the US, having just moved from Italy, and he needed some local help to set things up. My wife was excited. It was clear in the way she spoke, fast-paced, eyes bright. "You know how much I love organizing events," she said. I nodded. It was true. She thrived on logistics, planning, and coordinating people. This was right up her alley. "There's going to be a role for everyone," she continued. "Emily's already on board, and Desi seems like he knows his stuff when it comes to poker. But there's still plenty to do." She paused for a moment, then gave me a pointed look. "So? Will you help me?" I shrugged lightly, smirking. "Of course. Where else would I be?" The morning started earlier than I would have liked. My wife shook me awake with an urgency that immediately told me this wasn't going to be a slow, lazy day. She stood at the edge of the bed, already dressed and looking ready to tackle something big. "I have a massively important task today," she said. Her eyes had that sharp focus she always got when she was about to take control of a situation. I sat up, rubbing my face, and asked her to explain. Apparently, she and Desi had planned to personally deliver invitations to key poker players. Not just regular invitations either, golden envelopes, hand-delivered by Desi himself. Emily had already written out the formal invitation letters, and now my wife needed to swing by the print shop to have them professionally printed. I asked why they couldn't just send the invitations by mail. It seemed far more efficient. My wife shook her head and explained that the whole point was the personal touch. Desi was adamant about creating an impression, and handing these golden envelopes directly to the players was part of his plan. Fine. I couldn't argue with the logic, even if it sounded a bit theatrical. "What about me? What am I supposed to do in all this?" I asked. My wife, already in task manager mode, didn't hesitate with her response. While she and Emily handled the invitations, my job was to inspect a set of cottages that Desi had rented for the tournament. Apparently, Desi had spared no expense, and it was my responsibility to meet with the property manager, tour the facilities, and ensure everything met the criteria my wife would send me. I nodded. It sounded straightforward enough. We wrapped up the conversation, and she kissed me on the cheek before heading out. I stayed in bed a little longer, scrolling through my phone and enjoying the last few minutes of peace. Eventually, I got up, grabbed a quick breakfast, and checked my messages. She'd already sent me the list of requirements for the cottages. I drove out to the area later that morning. The neighborhood was upscale, with manicured lawns and sprawling properties behind iron gates. The property manager greeted me at the main office, clipboard in hand, and we started the tour. The first few cottages were massive, high ceilings, polished hardwood floors, and balconies overlooking private gardens. I walked through each one, ticking off the items from the checklist my wife had provided. Space for poker tables, check. Plenty of seating areas, check. Kitchen facilities, check. As we moved from one property to the next, I couldn't help but wonder about Desi. Poker might be lucrative for the best of the best, but the amount of money being thrown around here was staggering. Renting multiple high-end cottages, organizing a tournament, hiring staff, it was a significant financial investment. Either Desi was extremely confident in his skills, or he had some other source of income backing this whole operation. Still, my job wasn't to question the finances. My job was to make sure everything was in order. By mid-afternoon, I'd found a cottage that checked all the boxes. It was spacious, well-kept, and had enough room for both the poker tables and the guests. The property manager handed me a folder of documents, and I thanked him before heading back to the car. I sent a quick message to my wife, letting her know the inspection was complete. While waiting at a stoplight, I checked my messages. She'd sent me 3 photos earlier in the day, each one a snapshot of her and Emily handing over an invitation. But after that, nothing. No updates, no new photos. I frowned and typed out a quick message, "How's it going?" A few minutes later, she replied, saying everything was fine. Apparently, they were sitting at one player's house while Desi and the guy got deep into poker talk. "I'm just sitting here blinking like an owl," she joked. Satisfied with that response, I shrugged it off and drove home. The afternoon passed uneventfully. I went over the property documents, grabbed a snack, and zoned out on the couch. The sun dipped below the horizon, and still, my wife hadn't come home. I glanced at the clock, irritation creeping in. It wasn't like her to go radio silent for so long. When she finally walked through the door, an hour later than expected, the first thing I noticed was the red wine stain on her sleeve. I stood up and crossed my arms. "Where the hell have you been? And what happened to your shirt?" She sighed, dropped her bag on the table, and began explaining. After finishing their last stop, they'd met with an older gentleman, one of the veteran poker players Desi wanted to invite. The man had insisted on discussing details over dinner at a hotel restaurant nearby. During the meal, a waiter had accidentally spilled wine on her sleeve. It wasn't a big deal, she said, and Emily had been there the entire time. "Look," she said, pulling out her phone. She played me an audio recording of the meeting. Sure enough, I could hear the older man discussing tournament logistics and then a faint voice apologizing for spilling wine. It lined up with her story. I exhaled slowly, letting my irritation fade. "All right. Fine. Forget it." My wife raised an eyebrow. "Do you really think I'd cheat on you with Emily's boyfriend? Right in front of her?" She had a point, and I wasn't in the mood to argue. Before I could respond, she changed gears. "If you want to swap roles, just say so. Tomorrow, you're going with Desi to check out poker tables and finalize the rental. I'll handle the rest of the logistics from here." I shrugged. "Okay. No problem." She nodded and started heading upstairs to change. I called after her, "Just keep me in the loop from now on, all right?" She glanced back and gave me a quick nod before disappearing down the hallway. The day had been long, and tomorrow wasn't shaping up to be any easier. The day finally arrived, and I was ready. I had my checklist, my schedule, and my mindset focused on the task ahead. Before heading out, I decided to call Desi to confirm our plans. His voice came through the line sounding tired, strained even. "Listen, man, we've got a problem," he said. I think I had some kind of allergic reaction from last night's dinner at the hotel restaurant. "I'm a mess over here. Emily will go with you instead, and I'll stay on video call with you two the whole time. Sound good?" I felt a flicker of irritation, but kept it buried. This was just one more complication in an already convoluted plan. "All right, fine. I'll pick her up," I said flatly. I told my wife about the change in plans, and she sighed. "That's a shame." "I hope he recovers before the tournament," she said. Before I left, she reminded me she'd be home all day, assuring me there was nothing to worry about. I grabbed my keys, got in the car, and drove out to pick up Emily. When she climbed into the passenger seat, she greeted me with her usual energy. As we hit the road, I decided to ask her something that had been on my mind. "Has anything strange been happening lately? Anything that feels off?" She gave me a puzzled look. "No, not really." "Why?" I hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's just, there have been a lot of odd little things lately. Suspicious situations. Sometimes I don't know what to think." I kept my voice steady, but Emily clearly picked up on my unease. "You've been acting kind of tense lately," she said. "Are you okay?" I shrugged. "I'm fine. Just a lot on my plate, I guess." She nodded and let the topic drop, and we drove the rest of the way in silence. When we arrived at the warehouse, the place was massive, filled wall-to-wall with poker tables, chairs, and gaming equipment. Emily called Desi on video chat, and his grainy face appeared on her phone screen. He guided us as we walked through the aisles, dismissing table after table. 2 small, wrong felt color, uncomfortable chairs. Desi had a reason to reject each one. Finally, his face lit up when he spotted a specific table. "That one," he said, almost excited. "That's the one. It's perfect. We have to rent that table." Emily and I exchanged a glance. She gave me a thumbs up, and I started talking logistics with the warehouse manager. After some back and forth, we had the paperwork drawn up, and I signed off on the rental. Emily clapped her hands together. "All right, I think we're good here. I'm heading home. Can you handle the documents and make sure everything's finalized?" "Yeah, I got it," I said. She left, and I spent another half-hour dealing with paperwork and confirming delivery details. Once everything was squared away, I stepped outside, leaned against the car, and called my wife to let her know everything was handled. No answer. I waited a minute and called again. Still nothing. My jaw tightened. This wasn't like her. I told myself she was probably busy with something, a phone call, a shower, whatever. But the silence on the other end of the line felt heavier than it should have. I drove home, tension building in my shoulders with every mile. When I walked through the door, the house was empty. Lights off, curtains drawn. I stood there for a moment, staring at the quiet space. Then my phone buzzed. It was my wife. The moment I answered, her voice spilled out in a rush. "You're not going to believe this. My dad shot someone." I blinked. "What?" "Some drunk guy was trying to break into their house. My dad shot him in the leg. The police are there now, and my mom is freaking out." I came over to calm her down. My mind raced. "Do you need me to come over?" I asked. She sighed. "Yeah, but give it some time. Things are still hectic here. Just come pick me up later." The drive to her parents' house felt longer than it should have. When I arrived, the place was swarming with police cars. Blue and red lights painted the house in sharp, flashing streaks. I parked down the street and walked up to the house. Her father was outside, speaking with an officer. He spotted me, waved me over, and explained everything. The drunk man had been banging on the door, shouting incoherently. When her father warned him to leave and he didn't, he fired a single shot into the man's leg. The police had taken the intruder away in an ambulance, and now they were sorting through statements. I nodded as he spoke, listening carefully to every detail. Afterward, I went inside and found my wife sitting with her mother on the living room couch. Her mother looked pale and shaken, clutching a cup of tea with trembling hands. I sat with them for a while, offering quiet reassurances until things began to settle. Eventually, my wife stood up and grabbed her coat. "Let's go home," she said softly. We said our goodbyes, and I led her out to the car. The drive home was mostly silent. She stared out the window, and I kept my eyes on the road. The events of the day churned in my head: Des's sudden allergy, Emily's calm demeanor, the poker table rental, the unanswered phone calls, and now this incident with her father. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I felt something shift in my perspective. I realized that I'd been letting my mind get tangled in every minor detail, every suspicious glance, every unanswered question. It wasn't helping me. It wasn't helping her. As we walked inside, I told myself one thing: from now on, I would focus on the key details, the things that truly mattered. The noise and distractions could wait. What mattered was clarity, purpose, and trust. Nothing more, nothing less. The next day, we decided to take a breather. No tasks, no meetings, no running around town with checklists and deadlines looming over our heads. My wife and I sat down for lunch at home, enjoying the rare calm. Between bites, I casually brought up something that had been nagging at the back of my mind. How do you think Desi manages to afford all of this? These cottages, the catering, the equipment, it can't be cheap. She smiled slightly, as if she had been expecting the question. You'd be surprised how simple it actually is. Desi covers part of the costs himself, another chunk comes from his father, and most importantly, he has a sponsor. I raised an eyebrow. A sponsor? Yep. Apparently, it's not uncommon in the poker world, she continued. Some businesses love to attach their name to high-profile players, especially when there's an event involved. It's all about visibility. It made sense, but I couldn't help but question it further. Then why doesn't he just hire a professional team? Get everything done quicker and with less stress on us? She shrugged. Honestly, I think we're doing a pretty good job. Most of these services are bundled deals. You book catering, and you get drinks and serving staff included. It's efficient. Plus, this is a nice little project for my portfolio. That answer seemed to satisfy me for the moment, and the conversation shifted slightly. My wife then mentioned that she and Desi were meeting with the sponsor the next day at a casino. Why isn't Desi handling this alone? I asked. She smirked. Desi might be great at poker, but he has no clue about event organization or handling sponsors. He's out of his depth there, and that's where I come in. The logic was sound, and I couldn't argue with it. She explained that the meeting would cover final logistics, potential staffing assistance from the casino, and any last-minute sponsorship requirements. As we finished lunch, she added, "Oh, by the way, you should be getting a call soon." A call? About what? The tables and equipment have been delivered to the cottage. Your job is to go there, supervise the unloading, and make sure everything gets set up according to this layout. She showed me a photo on her phone, a detailed floor plan of the cottage with precise placement for every table, chair, and display. I studied it carefully, committing it to memory. Got it, I said. The rest of the day passed quietly, and by the next morning, it was time to get back to work. My wife dressed sharply before leaving for her meeting. She looked confident and poised, and as she grabbed her bag, she said with a smirk, "You know, sometimes the best way to win someone over is just to knock them out with beauty." I chuckled and nodded before heading out myself. The drive to the cottage was uneventful, and I arrived just as the delivery trucks were pulling up. The movers were efficient but not exactly detail-oriented, so I had to step in and direct them. Each table was placed according to the floor plan, and every chair was lined up with precision. It took hours. Between moving heavy tables, directing the crew, and double-checking every detail, I was completely drained by the end. I stepped back, took a photo of the final setup, and sent it to my wife. Her reply came quickly, "Well done, you nailed it." But there's one more thing. I sighed and leaned against one of the tables. What now? I muttered to myself. She explained that the sponsor had one condition: branded banners needed to be displayed prominently at the event. The problem? The banners hadn't been delivered, and I needed to go pick them up from a local print shop before they closed at 6 p.m. I glanced at the clock. It was already pushing 5 p.m. All right, fine. I'm on it, I texted back. The drive to the print shop was rushed, but I made it in time. When the employee brought out the banners, I inspected them closely. The company logos were sleek and professional, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had never heard of this sponsor before. Not once. They weren't a recognizable brand, and I couldn't recall seeing their logo at any other poker event. But I shrugged it off. Not every sponsor was a household name, and poker was a niche world. I loaded the banners into the car and drove back to the cottage, where I carefully set them up in their designated spots. By the time I got home, the sky was dark and my stomach was growling. My wife was already there, waiting in the living room. She greeted me with a warm smile and a glass of wine. We sat together, discussing the day in brief. She shared a few details about the sponsor meeting, and I filled her in on the challenges with the tables and banners. It felt good to sit down, relax, and let the weight of the day melt away. But even in that moment of peace, something still lingered at the back of my mind, a faint unease I couldn't quite name. I pushed it aside. Things were going well. The event was on track, and all the loose ends seemed to be tying themselves up. Before heading to bed, my wife turned to me and said, "Tomorrow is a big day. We're all heading to the cottage for the final walkthrough. Everything needs to be perfect." I nodded. Got it. With that, we turned off the lights and went to sleep, both of us unaware of just how complicated things were about to get. The final day had arrived, and everything was supposed to be straightforward. My wife and I got ready in the morning, both dressed casually but presentably. This was meant to be the last walkthrough before the big tournament. I was mentally prepared for the day ahead when my phone rang. It was an unusual call, my father-in-law. He rarely called me directly, which meant it had to be something important. I answered, and his voice sounded serious. He explained that he needed my help urgently with his car. Apparently, something had broken down, and it needed to be fixed before an important trip he had planned with my mother-in-law the next day. I relayed this to my wife, who nodded thoughtfully. "If he's calling you, it's serious," she said. "He doesn't ask for help lightly. But honestly, I think it might be one of my mom's whims. You know how she is about important dates and anniversaries." She reassured me that everything would be fine without me at the cottage. She, Desi, and Emily would handle the final walkthrough. "Just go help him," she said confidently. "We've got everything under control here." I agreed and drove to my in-laws' house. When I arrived, my father-in-law greeted me warmly. We went inside, had coffee, and chatted about random topics, sports, local news, family stories. I found it odd. If this was such an urgent issue, why were we wasting time with small talk? Still, I kept my thoughts to myself, not wanting to be rude. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages from my wife asking how things were going. Every hour or so, she'd check in, and it felt off. Like she was trying to keep me engaged away from the event. The thought lingered in my mind, but I brushed it aside. Maybe I was overthinking things. Finally, I suggested we move on to fixing the car. When we got to it, I examined the issue and realized something odd. The problem didn't seem accidental. It looked almost deliberate. I turned to my father-in-law and asked directly, "Are you sure this breakdown happened on its own?" He hesitated for just a second before nodding. "Yeah, absolutely. Just bad timing, I guess." I didn't press the issue. Instead, I focused on the repair, finishing it efficiently. When the car was up and running again, my mother-in-law invited me to stay for dinner. I hesitated, but then I realized something important. If I wanted answers, the best way to get them was to act natural. So I agreed. Dinner was uneventful. We talked, laughed a little, and nothing felt out of place. But underneath the surface, my mind was racing. Something wasn't adding up. Eventually, I said my goodbyes and headed home. When I walked through the door, my wife was already there. She was in a bathrobe, her hair still damp from a shower. She greeted me warmly, but I kept my expression neutral. I didn't want her to see the doubt swirling in my head. After a brief exchange, I noticed something odd, a bucket in the corner of the kitchen, filled to the brim with trash. I casually said, "I'll take this out to the bin outside." Her reaction was immediate and sharp. "No, leave it. You can do it later." That response raised every red flag in my mind. Later that night, when she was asleep, I quietly got out of bed. I checked the bucket, but it was filled with nothing unusual. Then I stepped outside and opened the trash bin. There it was, a used condom, buried under a layer of garbage. My stomach dropped. In the past week, my wife and I hadn't been intimate. Every time I'd suggested it, she'd brushed me off with excuses about exhaustion and stress from the tournament. But now, staring at undeniable proof, everything clicked into place. I needed more information. I needed to know with whom, how long this had been going on, and how deep this betrayal ran. I went back inside, grabbed her phone from the nightstand, and took it to the bathroom. It was locked. But I knew her well enough to guess the password. After 3 tries, the screen unlocked, and I was in. Scrolling through her messages, I found a hidden chat with Desi. My eye scanned the texts, and with every line, my pulse quickened. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning every detail. How they would sneak around, how they would cover their tracks. Emily, unknowingly, had been used as a cover. Every moment I'd been separated from my wife during the tournament preparations had been intentional. And then I saw the most damning part, a conversation about a VIP poker room. Apparently, they planned to use one of the private rooms at the event. My wife had even mentioned intentionally losing to Desi as part of their twisted game. There was even a room number. My mind raced. I couldn't let this slide. Not only was this morally despicable, but their actions also violated the rules of the venue. This could ruin the entire event and have legal consequences. I needed proof, solid, undeniable proof. I got dressed, grabbed a set of old phones and power banks I had lying around, and quietly slipped out of the house. I drove to the cottage, using the spare key I had been given during the inspection. Inside, everything was quiet. I located the specific rooms mentioned in the chat. In one of them, I found a stash of condoms hidden in a drawer. I quickly took and pierced each of them. Another room had a poker table set up with an almost theatrical flair. I carefully installed hidden cameras in the corners of the rooms. They were discreet but had a clear view of the key areas. I made sure everything was recording before slipping back out of the cottage and driving home. When I walked back inside, my wife was still asleep, completely unaware of what had just transpired. I transferred all the screenshots of their conversations to my phone and backed them up in multiple locations. Lying down in bed, staring at the ceiling, one thought echoed in my mind: tomorrow would be the end of their little game. Tomorrow, everything would come crashing down. The day of the tournament arrived, and my wife prepared herself with an almost ceremonial intensity. Her dress was immaculate, her makeup flawless, and the way she carried herself spoke volumes. It wasn't just another day for her, it felt like she was walking down the aisle on our wedding day. I kept my expression neutral, quickly gathered everything I needed, and we set off together. When we arrived at the venue, the scene was different from what I had expected. The place was packed with luxury cars, and groups of well-dressed people clustered in small circles, talking in hushed tones. But something was off. There were no cameras, no press, and no visible media presence. It didn't look like a professional poker tournament, it felt more like an exclusive private party, hidden away from prying eyes. I glanced around, scanning the environment. There were no banners beyond the ones I had set up myself. No hired staff running around, no bustling waiters or event coordinators. Just a room full of players, some casually sipping expensive drinks, others huddled around poker tables, exchanging glances and laughter. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I pulled out my phone and started searching the names of the supposed sponsors on the banners. Nothing came up. These weren't obscure brands or small-time companies, they were entirely fabricated. It became clear to me that the sponsor story had been a smokescreen from the start. Whoever had planned this event didn't want outside eyes digging into it. The hours dragged on, and I kept my distance, blending into the background while watching everything unfold. I was waiting for the right moment, a window of opportunity. Then it came. My wife approached me, her phone in hand and an annoyed expression on her face. "Something's come up," she said. "Apparently, there's an issue that needs handling. I'll take care of it. Your job is simple, just stay here, smile, and look like you're enjoying yourself." I nodded, feigning compliance, but inside, I knew this was the moment I'd been waiting for. She walked away briskly, disappearing into the crowd. Desi was nowhere to be seen, and Emily was walking aimlessly across the floor. Her posture was tense, and she kept glancing around nervously. I seized the moment, walked over to her, and grabbed her by the arm. "Come with me," I said quietly but firmly. She looked startled. "What are you doing?" she asked as I pulled her toward a restroom at the far end of the hallway. Once inside, I locked the door behind us. "Look at this," I said, pulling out my phone and showing her the footage from the cameras I had installed in the cottage rooms. The screen flickered to life, and Emily froze. There, in crystal clear detail, was a recording of my wife and Desi at a poker table. The game was unlike any professional poker match I had ever seen. It was poker for clothes, for intimacy. My wife intentionally lost round after round, and when she was down to nothing, they both disappeared into one of the private rooms. Emily's face went pale. She opened her mouth to say something but closed it again. I didn't need her to say anything. The truth was staring both of us in the face. "You're going to leave now," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Go home. Don't say a word to anyone. Do you understand me?" Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear and guilt. Without another word, she slipped out of the restroom and disappeared into the crowd. I stepped out, pulled out my phone, and dialed the police. Calmly but clearly, I explained the situation. An illegal poker event was happening, involving gambling, intimate exchanges, and unlicensed operations. I provided them with the evidence, including the video files and screenshots of the text messages I had uncovered. Then, I left. Back at home, I sat in the dim light of the living room, waiting. My phone buzzed about an hour later. It was my wife, and she was furious. Her voice crackled through the speaker, laced with panic. The police showed up, she yelled. They raided the place. Desi's been taken away, and the tournament is shut down. They're saying it was illegal. Oh my God, I can't believe this happened. I kept my voice calm. Where are you now? I'm on my way home. Where are you? Why aren't you here? I sighed, trying to sound casual. I forgot my charger at home. I stopped by to pick it up. That seemed to satisfy her for the moment, and she hung up. I knew she'd be home soon, and I had to prepare myself for whatever came next. When she walked through the door, she looked exhausted, her makeup smudged and her dress wrinkled. She dropped her bag on the floor and slumped into a chair. They said there's going to be a trial, she said. Des is in deep trouble. I don't even know how we got dragged into this. How did this happen? I kept my expression neutral and shrugged. Sometimes people get in over their heads. It was bound to fall apart sooner or later. She nodded, seemingly lost in her own thoughts. Then she called Emily, and I listened as Emily played her part flawlessly. She sobbed into the phone, acted hysterical, and blamed everything on Desi. It was a performance worthy of an award. I leaned back in my chair, watching my wife as she paced the living room, the phone pressed against her ear. This isn't over, I thought to myself. Not by a long shot. Believe me, this was just the beginning. The real fallout was yet to come. And it was going to be unforgettable. The days following the raid at the poker tournament were filled with silence and calculation. My wife had no idea that I had already contacted a lawyer. While she paced around the house, speaking nervously to Emily on the phone and trying to make sense of the fallout, I was busy planning my next steps. Every detail had been reviewed, every piece of evidence carefully organized, and every scenario considered. My lawyer and I had devised a clear plan, one that would leave no room for her to twist the story. The divorce papers were finalized, the evidence compiled neatly into a folder. Screenshots, photos, audio recordings, it was all there. I had been thorough, perhaps even obsessive, but I wanted to ensure there was no escape route for her lies. Once everything was ready, I reached out to Emily. Emily agreed to stand by me during the confrontation. I wanted my wife to face not only my accusations, but also the disappointment of her so-called friend. Emily had unwittingly been part of their cover story, and now she was determined to set the record straight. When I arrived to pick her up, Emily was waiting by the curb, clutching her purse and wearing an expression that told me she was as ready as she could be. The drive home was quiet. Emily stared out the window while I kept my eyes fixed on the road. We both understood the gravity of what was about to happen. As we pulled into the driveway, I could see the faint glow of lights coming from inside the house. My wife was home. When we walked inside, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Her face lit up with confusion and surprise when she saw Emily standing beside me. "What's going on?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I handed her a thick envelope. "Open it," I said flatly. She hesitated, her eyes flickering between me and Emily before slowly peeling the envelope open. The contents spilled into her lap: photos, chat logs, screenshots. And on top of the stack, the divorce papers sat like a final nail in the coffin. Her face went pale as she sifted through the evidence. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered. "You've got it all wrong. It's not what you think." Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Stop lying. I know everything. I saw the messages. I saw the videos. You can't talk your way out of this." My wife turned her pleading eyes to me. "It was a mistake. Desi manipulated me. You pushed me away. You were never there for me the way I needed." The excuses were predictable. The tears, the sudden vulnerability, the desperate search for a way out. I stood there, arms crossed, letting her words wash over me without effect. Emily didn't stay long after that. She gave me a quick nod and left the house, leaving me alone with my wife. The silence between us was heavy, suffocating. I didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I walked upstairs, pulled her suitcases out of the closet, and began packing her belongings. Clothes, shoes, cosmetics, everything went into suitcases and plastic bags. She followed me up the stairs, trying to stop me, but I ignored her entirely. When the last bag was zipped shut, I walked to the front door, opened it, and motioned for her to leave. "Go. You can figure out where to stay. I don't care anymore." Her face twisted with anger and shame, but she complied. She picked up her bags and walked out into the night. I closed the door behind her, locking it with a finality that felt like the end of a long, bitter chapter. I knew she would go to her parents' house. They had been part of the deception all along. I had once thought of them as people of integrity, but their silence and complicity told me everything I needed to know. They had chosen their daughter over the truth, and I couldn't fault them for that. But it didn't mean I had to respect them anymore. The legal battle began shortly after. My wife tried every trick in the book to delay proceedings. She argued over every detail, challenged every piece of evidence, and painted herself as the victim. But the facts were irrefutable. My lawyer was sharp, methodical, and relentless. Slowly but surely, we dismantled every argument she tried to make. When the dust settled, the court ruled in my favor. The house, the assets, and my peace of mind remained intact. My wife walked away with the bare minimum, and I walked away with the satisfaction of knowing the truth had prevailed. Desi, on the other hand, was another story. He had been released on bail and had fled back to his father's estate overseas. The poker tournament scandal had become a mess, but he had the resources to slip away from the worst consequences. Good for him. I hoped he stayed gone. After the court rulings were finalized, my wife disappeared from my life completely. No texts, no calls, no accidental run-ins. It was as if she had evaporated into thin air, and honestly, that was fine with me. Emily, however, stayed in touch. Our conversations became less about the past and more about moving forward. She had been a victim of their manipulation, too, and I respected her for coming clean and standing by me during the confrontation. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything, I feel no regret for how I handled it. Sometimes life hands you an ugly truth, and you have to face it head-on, no matter how much it hurts. I never heard from my wife again, and I don't want to. Some chapters are meant to remain closed. But Emily and I still talk from time to time. She checks in on me, and I check in on her. Life moves on, and so have I. That's my story. Believe me when I say, it's not the end, but it's the closure I needed.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Before we start today's story, please let us know your location in the comment section and don't forget to like and subscribe. The engine of my truck roared as I pulled into the driveway, the weight of 30 years behind the wheel pressing on me like a second skin. I'd come home early before, but this time felt different. There was no text, no phone call to let Emily know I was on my way. I wanted to see my family as they truly were, not the polished version they put on when they knew I was coming. What I didn't expect was the blaring music from the house. One of the songs Emily used to love back when we were in our 20s. My boots hit the steps as I moved closer, catching glimpses of shadows through the curtains. When I opened the door, I found Emily standing in the living room, her back to me, wearing something I'd never expect on our anniversary. Her hair was done, her makeup flawless, but it wasn't for me. My brother Tyler stood across from her, holding a beer, grinning like he owned the place. "What's this?" I said, my voice slicing through the air like a blade. Both of them froze. Tyler looked at me like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and Emily turned slowly, her face tight with barely concealed annoyance. "You're early," she said, as though that were the issue. "I am? Clearly, that's a problem." My eyes darted between them, catching the way Emily subtly adjusted her tank top and the way Tyler avoided my gaze. "It's not what it looks like," Emily said, crossing her arms. The words stung, but it was the flicker of panic in her eyes that told me I'd walked in on something I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't respond, my mind racing. The years spent on the road, the nights away from home, and Tyler always stepping in to help. It suddenly all seemed too convenient, too well-timed. Something inside me cracked, but I swallowed it down. "Is that what you'd say to the boys if they walked in right now?" I asked quietly. Her eyes widened, and Tyler stepped forward, his hands up like I was about to swing at him. "Hey, let's not make this a thing, man," he said. "It's not." I snapped coldly, my voice final. Tyler stepped back. Emily looked at me, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. In that silence, I felt the first real fracture of trust, a splintering I knew I couldn't ignore. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't. The following morning, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. Emily acted like nothing had happened, humming as she made breakfast, while Tyler was nowhere to be seen. The boys, Jason and Caleb, chattered away at the table, oblivious to the storm brewing in my mind. I sat there, picking at my food, replaying the scene from the night before. The way Emily had been dressed, Tyler's smirk, the way they froze when I walked in. I needed answers, but I wasn't going to tip my hand just yet. After breakfast, I went to the truck stop, hoping to clear my head. That's when I saw it again, the ad for the DNA test. This time, it didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a sign. By the end of the week, the test kits arrived. I told Emily I'd gotten them as part of a school project for Jason and Caleb, a way for them to learn about their ancestry. She raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. I swabbed their cheeks myself, my hands steady even though my heart felt like it might burst. The waiting nearly killed me. I stayed out late in the truck, claiming I was preparing for another haul, but really, I couldn't stand being in the same house as her. Every time I saw Emily, every time she smiled at me, it felt like a lie. The results came 2 weeks later. I opened the email while sitting in my truck, parked at the edge of a gas station lot. My eyes scanned the screen. Once, twice, 3 times, before I slammed my fist into the dashboard so hard that the glove compartment popped open. Not a match. Neither Jason nor Caleb. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I pulled out my phone and held up the DNA results for her to see. "Care to explain this?" Her eyes flicked to the screen, and for a split second, I saw it, a crack in her armor. But then she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Are you serious right now? You're really going to bring this up in front of Tyler? Well, he's part of this, isn't he?" I turned to my brother, who looked like he wanted to disappear. "Go ahead, Tyler. Tell me the truth. How long have you been screwing my wife?" Emily gasped, but Tyler raised his hands defensively. "Oh man, that's not what's happening here. You're blowing this way out of proportion." "Blowing this out of proportion?" I barked out a bitter laugh. "Neither of my sons are mine, and you're telling me I'm overreacting?" Emily stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare make this about Tyler. You were never here. I raised those boys on my own while you were out playing trucker hero. Maybe if you'd been around more, you wouldn't have to ask stupid questions like this." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. So it's true. Tyler's their father? Her silence spoke volumes. Tyler tried to say something, but I cut him off, my voice shaking with rage. Get out of my house. Both of you. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but I pointed to the door. Or I'll make you regret staying. They left, Emily dragging Tyler by the arm as their car pulled away. I stood in the doorway, staring at the spot where they had been, the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence in the house after they left was deafening. The boys were upstairs, oblivious to the chaos downstairs. I sat in the dim kitchen, the DNA results still open on my phone, the words searing into my brain. No match. My hands trembled as I poured myself a drink, but the whiskey didn't dull the sharp edge of betrayal cutting through me. I couldn't stop replaying everything. The years of absence, how Emily always seemed to have Tyler on speed dial whenever I wasn't around. I thought I was providing for my family, but now I knew Tyler had been filling the void I left behind. The next few days were a blur. Emily stayed with Tyler, taking the boys with her. She said it was for the best, claiming I was too angry to be around them. That part wasn't a lie. I was furious, so angry it felt like it could burn me alive. But it wasn't just about Emily or even Tyler. It was about everything I'd sacrificed, every moment I'd missed, only to find out it had all been for nothing. I needed clarity, so I went to my lawyer, Dan. He was the no-nonsense type, the kind who told you the truth even when you didn't want to hear it. I laid everything out for him. The DNA results, the years of lies, and the fact that Tyler was their biological father. Dan sighed, rubbing his temples. This isn't going to be easy, he said. Legally, you're still their father, but if Tyler pushes for parental rights, especially now that the DNA proves his paternity, the court might side with him. And Emily? I asked, my voice tight. She'll back him, Dan said flatly. She wants out, and Tyler gives her the easiest path. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But Dan wasn't finished. Listen, he said, leaning forward. We can fight this, but it's going to get ugly. And even if we win, you're looking at years of tension and a mess that could ruin you financially. You need to decide what's worth fighting for. That night, I sat in my truck, staring out at the dark highway stretching ahead of me. I'd spent my life solving problems with hard work and determination, but this wasn't a problem I could solve that way. This was personal. And that's when the idea hit me. A cold, calculated plan forming in the back of my mind. If the court wasn't going to deliver justice, I'd take matters into my own hands. But it couldn't be reckless. It had to be calculated, undeniable, and above all, untraceable. I began plotting, using every spare moment between hauls to gather the pieces I needed. I made calls, dug into Tyler's finances, and uncovered everything I could. What I found made my blood boil. Tyler and Emily had been planning this for years. Tyler had put his name on their bank accounts, secured a home for them, and even started pushing for full custody of the boys. On the day of the custody hearing, I walked into that courtroom with determination, my resolve as hard as steel. Tyler and Emily were sitting side by side, grinning like they were already victorious. The boys were under the care of a court-appointed advocate, unaware of the battle being fought over their future. When the judge ruled in Tyler's favor, granting him partial custody and the right to be listed as the boy's legal father, I didn't show any emotion. No outbursts, no argument. I simply nodded and walked out. They thought they'd won, but they had no idea that I'd already set the wheels of my revenge in motion. In the days that followed, I kept my head down. I knew that any sudden move or emotional outburst would give them ammunition to use against me. Let them think they had broken me. In truth, I was more focused than ever. Every piece of the puzzle was falling into place, and I just had to wait for the right moment. After the hearing, Tyler had the nerve to approach me in the parking lot, putting on his best concerned brother act, like we were still family. "Look, man," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I didn't mean for things to get this far, but the boys deserve stability. And Emily, well, she deserves someone who can be there for her." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. His smug tone, the way he acted like I had handed him my family, it made my skin crawl. But I just nodded, my voice steady. "You're right," I said. "They deserve the best." His grin widened, clearly thinking he had me. The next few weeks were eerily quiet. Emily and Tyler moved into a new house, a lavish place on the outskirts of town. Far too grand for Tyler, whose lifestyle had been supported by my hard work for years. I began making routine visits to places Tyler frequented, the bar he liked, the mechanic shop where he had his car serviced. I wasn't looking for trouble. I was gathering intel, piecing together his habits. Tyler was predictable, lazy even. He stuck to the same routines, never straying from the patterns I had already learned. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances, just a man doing his job, rebuilding his life. But in the back of my mind, my plan was steadily taking shape. One night, after a long haul, I stopped at a diner on the outskirts of town. As I sipped my coffee, I overheard two guys at the counter talking about a logging truck that had plowed through a fence on private property. The owner had been blamed for the damage because the fence wasn't properly marked. That conversation sparked something in me. What if something similar could happen to Tyler? Something big enough to send a message, but not so reckless that it would point back to me? I refined my plan, making it airtight. The timing had to be perfect. Emily and Tyler were hosting a housewarming party, their new life on display for all to see. It was the perfect backdrop for what I was about to do. That night, I parked my truck a few miles down the road and waited. I had studied every detail of their property, the incline of the driveway, the weak spots in the landscaping, the positioning of the house near a wooded area. As the music and laughter spilled out of the house, I revved the engine. My heart raced. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my pride, everything they had stolen from me. Then I hit the gas. The truck surged forward, headlights cutting through the darkness. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, every muscle in my body focused. This wasn't just a man driving a truck. It was a storm, years of betrayal and pain building to this single moment. The closer I got to their house, the more I could feel it. The louder the music grew, the more the chatter of their guests became faintly audible, even over the rumbling engine. It was almost fitting. Emily and Tyler inside, basking in the illusion of their stolen happiness, completely unaware of what was coming. As I neared the driveway, I slowed down, just enough to time it perfectly. A large SUV was parked across the street, blocking any clear view from the house. The property was surrounded by trees, and the driveway curved gently uphill before opening to the front yard. Everything about this moment felt inevitable, like it had been building for years. I slammed on the gas. The truck roared as it tore through the wooden gate, tires ripping up gravel. Guests screamed as the truck sped toward the house, the massive front windows reflecting my headlights. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his face frozen in shock and terror. At the last second, I swerved, avoiding a direct hit on the house, and instead plowed through the landscaped front yard. The truck screeched to a halt, the bumper just inches from the porch steps. The impact shook the ground, knocking over a set of garden lights and sending sparks flying into the air. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. I stepped out of the truck, the crunch of my boots on the ruined gravel sounding too loud. Tyler stumbled backward, tripping over the threshold, as Emily appeared behind him, her face twisted with a mix of fury and fear. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she screamed, her voice breaking. Tyler tried to shield her, raising his hands. "You've lost your mind, man." "Maybe I have," I said, my voice calm, eerily controlled. I walked up to the truck, placing a hand on the hood as I stared at them. "But you took everything from me, so now we're even." Emily's face drained of color. "This isn't over, you psycho. We'll have you arrested," she yelled. I tilted my head, cutting her off. "For what? An accident?" I gestured to the truck. "I'm just a tired trucker who lost control on a bad turn. It happens, doesn't it?" Tyler's jaw clenched as his eyes flickered to the gathering crowd of stunned guests on the lawn. No one said a word. No one dared. I turned back to Emily, leaning in close enough to see the panic in her eyes. "This is what it feels like to have your life shattered, Emily. You can't fix this with lies or lawyers." I climbed back into the truck, the engine rumbling as I reversed out of the wreckage. As I glanced back at the house, at the broken yard, the shattered confidence on their faces, I realized it wasn't everything I had lost, but it was a start. Driving away into the night, I knew something for certain. They would never look at me the same way again. For the first time, I wasn't the man who sacrificed for them. I was the man who made them pay. The night after the incident, I parked my truck in its usual spot at the depot, wiping dirt and sweat from my hands. I had driven straight to my company's garage, where the minimal damage to the truck, thanks to my careful planning, was chalked up to a mishap during a late-night delivery. No questions asked. That's the beauty of a reputation built on reliability. People trust you even when they shouldn't. But the aftermath of my revenge wasn't as simple as leaving the wreckage behind. By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up with messages, frantic voicemails from Emily, Tyler's weak attempts to sound intimidating, and even a few calls from the sheriff's office. It didn't matter. I had covered my tracks too well for them to pin anything on me. The next day, I woke up to the sight of 2 sheriff's deputies standing at my front door. Their presence didn't shake me. I was ready for this. "Are you Roy Walker?" one of them asked, his tone brisk. "That's me," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "We've got some questions about an incident at your brother's place last night," one of the deputies said. "Witnesses reported seeing your truck on the property." I scratched my chin, feigning confusion. "Yeah, about that," I replied, putting on an innocent tone. "I was headed home from a run and must have missed a turn. The roads out there are pretty rough, you know." I stopped to check my GPS, but when I saw all those people, I realized I'd made a mistake and just got out of there. The deputies exchanged a look, their skepticism barely hidden. "Mind if we take a look at your truck?" the other one asked. "Go ahead," I said, stepping aside. They spent the next 20 minutes inspecting every inch of the vehicle. I'd made sure there was nothing incriminating, no debris, no visible damage, nothing that could link me to the destruction at Tyler's place. When they finally left, I exhaled slowly. I'd won the first round. The real victory came later that afternoon when I got a call from Dan. "I've got news," he said, his voice clipped. "The court's reviewing Tyler's custody agreement. Your little stunt rattled them enough to look into his finances and Emily's situation. Turns out Tyler's been hiding some debt, and Emily's job history isn't stable enough to guarantee a good home for the boys." I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of my plan falling into place. "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means the court might reconsider you as the boys' legal father," Dan said. "But you've got to play it straight from here on out. No more accidents." I smirked, knowing full well I had already achieved my goal. By the end of the week, Emily and Tyler were scrambling to fix the damage, not just to their yard, but to their perfect little facade. Meanwhile, I went about my life, focused and calculated. The world thought I was moving on, but in reality, I was just waiting for the next crack in their armor to show. The beauty of revenge wasn't just in the act. It was in watching the ripple effect, knowing that every move I made sent their world spiraling. The fallout from the night at Tyler's house spread quickly. Small-town gossip moves fast, and by the next morning, everyone knew about the accident. People whispered about how a truck had nearly flattened Tyler's perfect suburban dream. Though no one outright said it, they all knew it was me. Emily's lawyer filed for a restraining order, citing the incident as proof that I was a danger to her and the boys. I had expected that move. What they didn't expect was that I had already prepared my counterstrike. When the court hearing for the restraining order arrived, I walked in with my lawyer, Dan, carrying a thick folder of evidence. Emily sat across from us, flanked by Tyler, both of them looking smug, certain they had me cornered. The judge opened with the accusations against me. Reckless behavior, endangering my family, showing up unannounced. When it was my turn to speak, Dan stood and calmly placed the folder on the judge's bench. "These are financial records for Mr. Tyler Walker," Dan began, his voice steady. "They show a consistent pattern of unpaid debts, fraudulent loans, and a failed business venture that nearly left him bankrupt last year." Tyler's face drained of color. Dan continued, "And here are messages between Emily Walker and Tyler spanning over a decade. They suggest an ongoing affair during the marriage, as well as their plans to manipulate custody proceedings in their favor." Emily shot to her feet, her voice trembling with outrage. "That's a lie," she shouted. The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down, Mrs. Walker." I stayed silent, letting Dan handle everything. He painted a clear picture. Emily and Tyler weren't the responsible parents they claimed to be. They were reckless, deceitful, and unfit to have custody of Jason and Caleb. By the end of the hearing, the judge didn't grant the restraining order. Instead, he ordered a deeper investigation into Tyler's finances and Emily's living situation. As we left the courtroom, Emily shot me a glare that could have melted steel. Tyler tried to keep his head down, but I caught the look of pure rage burning beneath the surface. "Enjoy the spotlight," I told them as I walked past. "It's not over yet." Even as I played the part of the calm, collected man reclaiming his dignity, my real plan was still in motion. Late one night, parked at a rest stop miles from town, I made a call to an old friend, a man who specialized in fixing problems the law couldn't touch. "I need information," I said, keeping my voice low. I needed airtight proof on Tyler Walker, something that would leave no room for doubt. Over the next few weeks, I gathered the pieces of the puzzle. Tyler had a gambling addiction, borrowing money from some dangerous individuals, and his debts were quickly catching up with him. More importantly, he had been using funds from Emily's accounts to cover his tracks, all without her knowledge. When the full picture came together, it wasn't just a scandal. It was a ticking time bomb. All I had to do was light the fuse, and I knew exactly when to strike. The custody review hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. By then, I would have everything I needed to make sure Emily and Tyler's perfect little world came crashing down. Until then, I kept driving, kept waiting, and kept the fire inside me burning. This was no longer just revenge, it was justice. As the custody review hearing approached, every day felt like the noose was tightening around Tyler and Emily, not me. The information I had gathered was a loaded gun, and I was about to aim it squarely at the heart of their lies. In the weeks following the courtroom drama, Tyler started to unravel. Word about his gambling debt spread, thanks to a few anonymous tips I made to the right people. Suddenly, the whispers around town shifted focus. They were no longer about me, but about Tyler's shady dealings. Emily, of course, had no idea what was really happening. She probably thought life was just throwing her one curveball after another. What she didn't know was that each curveball had my fingerprints all over it. I made sure to stay visible in town, keeping up appearances, smiling at neighbors, and even volunteering to coach Caleb's little league team when another dad dropped out. The kids didn't know anything about the custody battle or the DNA test. So to them, I was still their dad, and I planned to keep it that way. But Emily was on edge. She tried to confront me once outside a grocery store, her face flushed with anger. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" she hissed. I didn't take the bait. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Emily. Everything I've done has been for the boys." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't over. You don't win." "We'll see," I said, walking away. The night before the custody hearing, I received the final piece of the puzzle. My friend on the road had outdone himself. He handed me bank transfer records, loan agreements, and even an email thread where Tyler admitted to falsifying his income to secure a loan for the house he and Emily were living in. The documents were airtight, undeniable, and devastating. I walked into the hearing the next morning with quiet confidence. Tyler and Emily sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, their lawyer trying to look composed, but failing miserably. When it was my turn to present my case, I handed the judge a thick stack of evidence. "Your Honor," my lawyer began, "we have reason to believe that Mr. Tyler Walker and Mrs. Emily Walker are not only unfit to share custody, but have also actively endangered the children's financial and emotional well-being through deceit and mismanagement." The room fell silent as the judge flipped through the pages. The tension was palpable, and I could see Tyler squirming in his seat, sweat beading on his forehead. When the judge finally looked up, his expression was cold. "This is troubling, to say the least," he said. Tyler stammered. "That's not what it looks like." "I can explain." The judge cut him off. "You'll have a chance to explain during the investigation. For now, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order against Mr. Walker, and custody of the children will remain with their legal father, Roy Walker, until further notice." Emily's gasp filled the room as Tyler buried his face in his hands, but I wasn't celebrating yet. I knew this wasn't over. As I left the courtroom, I could feel Emily's glare burning into my back. She wasn't going to give up easily, and neither was Tyler. That was fine. I still had one final move to make, the kind they'd never see coming. The days leading up to the custody review hearing passed with quiet intensity. Tyler and Emily retreated, licking their wounds, but I knew better than to think they were finished. They'd lost the latest battle, but the war wasn't over. Then, on a late Friday night, the call came in. An old friend from the trucking depot, who knew about my situation, passed on a chilling tip. Tyler and Emily were planning to use the boys as leverage in one last desperate attempt to destroy me. The details were vague, but it was clear they were desperate, and desperate people made dangerous moves. Sitting in the cab of my truck, I stared at the phone, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't going to let them win, not after everything. The pieces of my plan were already in place. I'd spent weeks preparing, making sure that what I was about to do would leave no trail back to me. This wasn't an impulse. It was the culmination of months of betrayal, calculation, and resolve. I made one last call to Dan, my lawyer, to confirm that the custody case was still in my favor and that there was no way they could legally regain control of the boys. Then, I pulled up a map of Tyler's property, marking every angle, every point of approach. By the time I arrived at their house, the night was quiet. Their lights were still on, and I could hear muffled laughter from inside. They were celebrating something, probably another scheme. I parked my truck a safe distance away and double-checked everything. The trajectory, the speed, the structural weaknesses I'd scoped out during earlier reconnaissance drives. If done right, it would look like a tragic accident, one that would leave them shaken but unscathed, while making it clear they were no longer untouchable. The plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about sending a message they'd never forget. I eased the truck into gear, my heart pounding, but my mind calm. Every turn of the wheel, every second ticking by, felt like stepping further into a moment I couldn't undo, but I wasn't turning back. As I approached the house, I saw Tyler through the large bay window, holding a drink and laughing with Emily. That image burned into my memory, the two of them carefree, basking in the comfort of a life built on my sacrifice. I floored the accelerator, and the truck roared to life, barreling through the driveway and crashing into the front yard. Lights flickered, screams echoed from inside, and the heavy front bumper collided with the porch, shattering the wood into splinters. I hit the brakes just in time to avoid destroying the entire house. Smoke billowed from the engine as I stepped out, my boots crunching on the gravel. Tyler stumbled out of the house, his face pale with shock, and Emily wasn't far behind, her voice a high-pitched scream of fury. "You're insane," she shrieked. "You'll go to jail for this." I didn't say a word. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the edge of the property where a surveillance camera blinked silently at me. It wasn't mine. It was theirs. I made sure to turn toward it, raising my hand slightly as if to say, "Look at me. I'm unarmed. This isn't what it seems." Then, as if by sheer coincidence, I walked to the truck's cab and calmly retrieved the clipboard I had planted there earlier, filled with falsified delivery papers. The papers showed I had been making a delivery nearby and had experienced a mechanical failure with the brakes. I called 911 myself, reporting the incident as a horrible accident caused by a sudden loss of control. I made sure to sound shaken, but cooperative. When the deputies arrived, they examined the scene, my truck and the supposed mechanical failure. The house was damaged, but no one was hurt. The officers took my statement, and Tyler tried to scream about how I'd done it on purpose. "Do you have proof?" one deputy asked flatly. Tyler froze. The damage was damning, but there was no evidence, none that could link it to deliberate intent. I'd made sure of that. As the deputies let me go with nothing more than a citation for property damage, I saw the look in Emily's eyes, rage, disbelief, and something else, fear. And for the first time, I felt free. But the final act wasn't over yet. The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered his final decision. Tyler and Emily sat across from me, their lawyer hunched over in defeat. Every lie, every betrayal, and every desperate ploy they had used against me had crumbled under the weight of the truth. The investigation into Tyler's depths, Emily's deceit, and their toxic manipulation painted such a damning picture that even their lawyer had stopped trying to defend them. The judge's voice was steady, but his words hit hard. Full custody of Jason and Caleb was awarded to me. Emily and Tyler were restricted to supervised visitation, pending further review. I sat back, my hands steady on the table in front of me, feeling the tension in my chest finally ease. Tyler looked like a ghost, slumped in his seat, while Emily seethed with barely contained fury, her face twisted in the realization that the life she and Tyler had carefully built was falling apart, piece by piece. As we left the courtroom, Emily made one last attempt to corner me in the hallway. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "You think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable." I looked her dead in the eye, my voice calm and steady. "It's over for you. The boys will never see the kind of people you and Tyler have become. That's my promise." She stood there, speechless, as I turned and walked away. Jason and Caleb were waiting for me at the other end of the hallway, with my lawyer just outside. The air was crisp, the cool breeze a reminder that it was time for a fresh start. The boys were quiet on the drive home, but as we pulled into the driveway, Jason spoke up. "Dad," he said hesitantly, "are we going to be okay now?" I nodded, my grip on the steering wheel firm but gentle. "We're going to be better than okay, son. I promise." That night, after putting them to bed, I sat alone on the porch with a glass of whiskey, staring at the stars. The road that had brought me here had been brutal, filled with betrayal, loss, and anger. But in the end, I had reclaimed what mattered most. For men like me, who've given everything to their families, often at the cost of their own happiness, there's a lesson in all of this. The world won't always give you justice, not unless you fight for it with everything you've got. But there's a line you can't cross, even in revenge. I had towed that line, came close to losing myself, but in the end, I found something far more important. My pride, my integrity, and the love of my sons. As the night stretched on, I realized the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine now, and for the first time in years, I was driving towards something worth fighting for. I took a long sip, the whiskey burning smooth, and whispered to the stars, "Here's to moving forward." Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
My fiancé's cheating was exposed just before our wedding. I had to cancel the ceremony and our future. I often wonder when I'll get over this. My fiancé and I were together for 6 years. I proposed to her during COVID, not knowing that she was already having an affair when she accepted my proposal. It's baffling, right? How can someone say yes to a marriage proposal while involved with someone else? Anyway, it's a long tale. I've been writing it out for weeks. It's like therapy for me. Not really seeking advice, just trying to share my story. I'm not the most socially adept guy, especially with the ladies, but when I met my fiancée, let's call her Bess, I fell head over heels in love in an instant. I'd never experienced love before, but I knew she was the one I wanted to spend my life with as soon as we met. Strangely, she seemed to feel the same way about me, and we were discussing kids and moving in together by the end of the week. Everything was wonderful until Discovery Day, at least from my perspective, although it clearly wasn't the same for Bess. One day, I caught a glimpse of a suspicious message on her phone, which made me pause. I couldn't sleep that night and ended up checking her phone while she was asleep. I'm quite tech-savvy, as I make a living from some mobile apps I developed. I'm not super wealthy, but I can comfortably take a year off without financial hardship. Anyway, I didn't find concrete evidence, but I did uncover a lot of suspicious activity, like deleted messages. There was also a Snapchat contact with a lot of interactions and pictures of a guy I didn't recognize, so I installed spyware to monitor her phone, opting for the most expensive service I could find, which even allowed me to remotely access the camera and microphone. The following day, Bess was scheduled to go on a 5-day business trip, which wasn't unusual given her sales job. As soon as she left, the messages started pouring in, and I was devastated, even vomiting several times. I couldn't believe what I was reading. For a while, I refused to accept the truth and became obsessed, digging into everything I could access. I discovered that their affair had started over 2 months before I proposed. Her affair partner was a colleague, a married man 10 years her senior with 3 children and a pregnant wife. The ultimate blow was hearing them together in a hotel room, proclaiming their love for each other and discussing running away to start a new family. I was completely shattered and didn't know how to handle it. I couldn't muster the courage to confront her directly. Ultimately, I confided in my childhood best friend, let's call him Kay. Kay grew up in a Brazilian household, and when he and his mother moved in next door when I was 12, this was in the UK. We became close friends despite not speaking the same language initially. I guess we bonded over shared experiences. Kay and I have been inseparable since, even though I'm a shy, nerdy type and he's outgoing and fearless. I poured my heart out to Kay and showed him the messages and emails I had uncovered. He remained silent for a while, then told me he couldn't provide specific advice. This was something I had to deal with in my own way. He shared his own story of being cheated on and how he exposed his cheating partner to family and friends, and then went no contact. I was lost for the next few days. We packed up Bess's belongings and took them to a storage unit. We changed the locks on my apartment and prepared to pick her up from the airport. When she got into the car, she seemed cheerful and unaware that something was wrong with me. I just said I wasn't feeling well. Kay smiled at her and mentioned a fantastic surprise plan for her at her parents' house. I didn't utter a single word during the entire trip, trying to hide my feelings and forcing a fake smile. Since Bess got in the car, the rest of the day felt like it was moving in slow motion. I'd already talked to our parents the day before and let them know we were coming over. I mentioned I had a surprise announcement to share. When we got there were hugs, smiles, and I almost changed my mind at that point. I really care about her parents. They've been incredibly kind and welcoming to me. Soon, Bess was sitting on the sofa between her parents. Eventually, someone asked about the big surprise, and Kay encouraged me to go ahead. I began by expressing my deep affection for her parents and how grateful I was for their warm welcome into their family. Then, I got choked up for a few minutes. I had a whole speech prepared, eloquent and well-composed, but I completely forgot it. So I blurted out the truth. I revealed that Bess had been cheating on me with a CO worker who had kids and his wife was 7 months pregnant. The engagement was off, the wedding was canceled, and our relationship was over. I told Bess that her belongings were in a storage container, and I dropped the key on the floor. It was a farewell forever. I left while everyone sat there in stunned silence. I heard Kay tell them that I needed time to heal and not to contact me unless absolutely necessary. In the car, Kay suggested I post the same message on our Facebook group where we had been planning the wedding. Everyone, including both our families and friends, posted similar messages before leaving the group. Kay kept telling me he was proud of me and that one day I'd look back and be glad I stood up for myself, but at that moment I just felt numb. Nothing about this situation felt good or real. Our next planned stop was to visit the affair partner's wife. When she opened the door, I blurted out everything without even introducing myself. I think she even slapped me at some point as I handed her a thumb drive with the evidence. Her husband appeared from behind her. His wife immediately started yelling at him to leave and not come near her. He tried making excuses, but when he took a step forward, Kay confronted him saying, "You heard the lady, get out." After some back and forth, he eventually packed a bag and left. Kay talked to his wife for a while I was trying to process the chaos in my own mind. In the end, we were invited inside Kay's mother's house, and we agreed to stay there until her father could pick her up the next morning. She was afraid her husband might return, and she didn't want to be alone. I felt like I had become invisible. No one acknowledged me, and I sat there crying silently. I understood her situation was much worse than mine, as I wasn't married and didn't have children. Eventually, they all fell asleep while I continued to cry quietly. I decided I wanted to end it all. I began searching for pills, but I couldn't find any. I was struggling to comprehend the situation. Her father arrived at 5:30 in the morning, and I opened the door for him. He calmly asked me some questions and checked on my well-being before going inside to find his daughter. I just stood there holding the door. Shortly after, Kay came out to talk to me. I stared at him for a moment, then passed out. I woke up in the hospital, and it's been 3 months since all this happened. Kay stayed with me during the first few weeks after I returned home because he was worried I might attempt bad things again. I haven't spoken to my ex-fiancée since. I changed my phone number, blocked her email address, and restricted access on social media. She's come to my door many times, talking through it for hours. She apologizes and begs for forgiveness. She said she ended the affair and that the affair partner's wife reported them to HR, which resulted in her losing her job. Hey guys, this marks the end of part 1 of the story. We're about to continue with part 2, but before we do, as usual, I'd like to ask those who haven't subscribed to please click that subscribe button. Your support means a lot to us and encourages us to present stories in better ways. Now let's move on to the updates. Update. I eventually decided to talk to her parents to see if they could help stop her from coming to my door. I don't care about her reasons or what she wants. I've realized that my perception of her and who she really is are entirely different. I just want her out of my life so I can move on. Before I was ready to speak to her parents, her dad came to my door. He brought a 6-pack of my favorite beer and asked if we could talk. I agreed and told him I was on my way out, suggesting we could walk and talk. I didn't want him inside, not only because my apartment was a mess, but also because I didn't want to risk her suddenly showing up at the door. He opened 2 bottles of beer, and we began to chat. Initially, he apologized on behalf of his daughter and mentioned that both his wife and daughter had pressured him to talk to me. He said his daughter was spoiled and selfish, and he hoped she would finally face the full consequences of her actions and maybe become a better person in the future. I asked him if everything was okay between us, and he assured me there were no problems. He even jokingly suggested it might be time for me to get a divorce. Apparently, their confrontation didn't go well after he met me, but this time he was determined not to back down. It seemed like a long overdue fight for him. As for Kay, he's been a great support as always. He's been there for me, encouraging and uplifting me. Now that I'm out of it, I realize he was right. One day I'll be proud of what I did. I stood up for myself, something I rarely do, and I feel great about it. I definitely do it again when necessary. My ex showed up at my door again, and this time I actually talked to her. She begged me to let her in so we could talk. I agreed, but told her I had some things to do, and suggested we meet at a local park in half an hour. I didn't want her inside my messy place, fearing she might make accusations or something if we met alone. Surprisingly, I wasn't nervous. I actually felt pretty good. So I went to the park, and she was there crying. We had some meaningless small talk, and she tried to pry into my conversation with her father. I told her that was private between us and none of her business. I was getting bored, so I asked her what she wanted to talk about, and she went on a long rant about how sorry she was and how much she loved me. I forgave her because I didn't want to carry anger, hatred, and hurt anymore, but getting back together is out of the question. People who love each other don't do what she did to me. She cried hysterically, and I watched without feeling much attachment. I called her dad to pick her up, and I told her I hoped she would seek counseling to fix whatever was broken inside her. Then I got an Uber and went to the local animal shelter where I adopted a kitten. I named the kitten Shiny. Kay joked that he was blinded by my newfound confidence. I named the kitten Shiny as a reminder to always stand up for myself. I'm happy that I took the high road and was honest with her without yelling or name-calling. I've been playing with my amazing kitten and having a lot of fun. Kay is coming over later to play video games and have some beers. I'm still sad about my ex, and I'll miss the good times we had. But I'm also relieved this chapter of my life is over. It is what it is. Be warned, this is a straightforward tale of sadness and regret. I'm Bonnie Brown, but I was born Bonnie Betsy Lowry. My parents had high hopes for me. I married Benjamin Brown, but it didn't bring me any grace as you might expect. At 38, I made a mess of my life. Doesn't sound old, right? Well, at the time it felt like it. You know how our society idolizes youth? You work hard, take school seriously, graduate with good grades, find a good job, marry someone great, have a few kids, and just when things are looking up, the world shifts its focus to someone younger. Actually, it wasn't one specific thing. I slowly realized that the young interns at the office were getting all the attention. Men used to flirt with me, and although I didn't let them go too far, it was fun and made me feel attractive. Then one day, that attention disappeared. Life became a series of responsibilities. Work demanded more from me, and my kids needed help with their daily tasks. There were chores, bills, and countless other things. Sure, my husband helped a lot, but I still felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. In hindsight, I might have been depressed, but I can't say for sure. All I know is that I was drowning in obligations, stuck in an unchanging routine. I must have lost my mind. I'd give anything to have that life back, even just for a day, but I can't because I've lost it all, including my soul. On March 5th, a Wednesday, I was called into the director's office. In 17 days on a Monday, I had to go to New York for a week of training. It was like my company's version of management school, a sign that they saw potential for my promotion. I was on the rise, and I eagerly shared the news with my family. They were supportive, filled with questions and encouragement. I went shopping using Ben's credit card and bought new clothes for the trip. I wanted to make a lasting impression on the up-and-coming professionals from around the country. I wanted them to remember me. Well, they certainly remember me now. Sunday arrived, and I left for the airport after a quick goodbye to my family. I thought they'd understand that I'd be busy with classes and staying at the hotel. I settled into my room, met some people during dinner, and had drinks with Janet, Dawn, and Jim. Jim and I even danced. It was a refreshing change from my routine, and I convinced myself it was nothing special, but the guilt crept in, so I excused myself for the night. I realized I hadn't called home, but it was too late to make that call. Despite my emotions, I stayed focused on the classes. Every evening, we met at the bar for drinks. I danced with many men, but Jim held my attention. I felt youthful once more. As the nights went on, Jim and I grew closer, maybe too close. We danced for hours, and one night we never even made it back to the dance floor. We even had a passionate encounter before parting ways. I felt young and reckless, as if I had no responsibilities. Occasionally, guilt crept in, but Jim diverted my thoughts. Looking back, he offered nothing my husband couldn't provide. His kisses weren't romantic, and his voice didn't soothe. All he gave were 2 nights of passion and a quick encounter before leaving on the flight home. Returning to my life, reality washed over me hard. I had cheated on my husband, the man I loved, with a near stranger, and I did it without remorse. Worse, I did it in front of others who silently judged me, not out of jealousy, but disappointment. In just a few days, my reputation would be ruined, and I'd be labeled as promiscuous in every office nationwide. It was only a matter of time before news of my actions reached my workplace. I worried about how to keep this from Ben. Even though he wasn't particularly close to my CO workers, he did attend company events occasionally, like Christmas parties and barbecues. Sooner or later, someone would spill the beans, and then what could I do? Somebody would eventually spill the beans, and then what would I do? Even worse, what if I had contracted a disease? Dread consumed me for the rest of the flight. It felt like my fate was sealed, and it was just a matter of time before my life, my husband, my kids, and my home were all in jeopardy. I tried to think of a way to put that week behind me, but I couldn't. Adding to the stress, I didn't even have his cell phone number. He was just a man who desired me more than those young interns, someone I could enjoy for a few days without any responsibilities. From that point on, I was walking on thin ice. The plane brought me closer to my fate, and I saw no way out except to face it and deal with the consequences. I considered telling Ben and throwing myself at his mercy, but what if he couldn't forgive me? I knew I could never forgive myself if I were in his shoes. When I finally got home, I knew that Ben would want. I'd been away for nearly a week, and turning him down would hurt him, but the fear ate away at me. What if I had contracted something during that week? If I gave it to Ben, he'd surely figure it out, and I'd be worse than anyone in his eyes. My heart raced uncontrollably, and for a moment, I entertained the thought of having a heart attack, hoping it would somehow spare me from the impending disaster, but luck was not on my side. The drive home was agonizing. With every mile, it felt like I was marching toward my own doom, and I had no way to stop it. As I walked through our front door, I hoped it would still be our front door. I was greeted by the joyful cries of, "Mommy's home!" 3 children rushed to hug me, and my husband showered me with kisses. Everyone was smiling, eager to hear about my week, what I had experienced, what I had done, and what it was like. I nearly broke down right then and there, but I managed to keep my composure. What had I done? How could I tell them what I had done? I looked from child to child and saw nothing but love. My husband was thrilled by my return. Everyone was delighted to see me, and I was surrounded by love from all sides. I didn't deserve any of it. I had betrayed them all. I put on a brave face and told them all about the course, the meals, and the sights and sounds of the city. I left out the affair, how I acted in front of everyone, and my betrayal. From that evening on, I lived in fear of being discovered, and then the desire to be intimate came. I couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. I convinced myself that Jim wasn't a bad guy, that he was clean, and I resolved to be the best, most loving wife imaginable. I was determined that if Ben ever found out, his love for me would outweigh the anger and hurt, and he would forgive me. But I forgot one thing. Opus update. Fast forward 4 months, and I was starting to believe I had gotten away with it. I swore to myself I'd never repeat my mistake, never betray Ben and the kids. I was committed to being the perfect wife. Then one day, I came home expecting to prepare dinner for the family. The house was silent. There were no voices, no activity, none of the chaos I had once taken for granted. Instead, Ben sat quietly in a chair, looking dejected, with tears streaming down his face. "Ben, what's wrong, honey? Are you okay?" "I received an email at work today. It seems you must have angered someone at your office, said something wrong, made them mad. Whatever you did, they really dislike you." "What did I do? I usually get along with everyone." "I don't know. I just got an email today with some cell phone photos of you at your training course. Remember when you went away for that week of training? It looks like you had a good time. It looks like the guy you were with had an especially good time." I heard my husband's words, and I wanted to deny everything. I wanted to tell him I loved him and only him, that there could never be anyone else for me but him, but I couldn't. My mind went blank and I sat there with my mouth open just staring into space. Was this the beginning of the end? Would I lose everything because of a week of foolishness, more than I had ever done before, or would ever do again? Was my life as I knew it over? He had the proof. There were no pictures from inside the bedrooms, but he had photos of me doing things in public that I couldn't remember doing. He showed me the images, and pictures don't lie. I was dancing too closely with Jim, kissing him on the dance floor and at our table. There was even a photograph of Jim's hand on my leg and up my skirt as we sat at the table. It was over. My fate was sealed. I confessed everything and begged for forgiveness. Ending number 1, I had to try. Tears in my eyes, I said, "Ben, I am so very sorry. I want you to know that nothing like this has ever happened before, and it will never happen again. Sweetheart, I love you so much. I love the life we have together. Please, please give me a second chance. I promise you won't regret it. I'll make you forget the one and only time I ever did something so stupid. You won't regret it, I promise." Believe it or not, that's exactly what my loving, amazing husband did, or tried to do. He didn't ask for more details. He didn't make me recount my actions or explain why. He just sat there and cried for hours as he slowly withered inside. I held him, kissed him, and assured him of my love, pledging to take away his pain and never hurt him again. I did everything I could to keep that promise. So, I mentioned that I forgot one thing, right? I forgot that when you break a man's heart, you can't always mend it. This man who loved me unconditionally, who existed to make me happy, was broken beyond repair. He never smiled again. He never laughed again. We sometimes made love, but it felt like his mind was elsewhere, imagining me with someone else. I did everything in my power to heal him, but it was never enough. The kids grew up, got jobs, and moved away. We still slept next to each other, but there was a quiet sadness in the house. Eventually, I realized that it wasn't just the physical affair that had ruined my life. I had shattered my husband's sense of self-worth, his feeling of being loved, and his belief that his life had meaning. I came to a crossroads. I could either leave him, giving him the chance to find another woman who could rebuild the man I had destroyed, or I could stay and try my best to be a loving wife, even if he never saw me the same way again. I knew that leaving would only confirm what my infidelity had told him, that he was worthless as a husband and a man. So I stayed, and I watched this wonderful man slowly crumble, until there was little left of the man I had married. Somehow, my kids found out what I had done. Ben never told them. He wouldn't do that to them or me. How they found out, I don't know, but they did. It created a rift between us that never fully healed. They witnessed their father's slow decline, and they knew it was all my fault. You see, I never went through with the divorce I had contemplated on that flight home all those years ago. But I lost my husband and my children just as surely and completely as if they had all left me and moved away. Oh, they left me all right, but they never physically went away. Ending number 2, so as I mentioned, I forgot one important thing, didn't I? I failed to realize that when you break a man's heart, you irreversibly change him. The man who once loved me unconditionally, who existed to make me happy, was now beyond repair. He tried, really tried. We had conversations, I poured my heart out, and we even sought counseling. All I wanted was to see him happy again, to wipe away the pain and disappointment I had brought into his life, but 6 months later, we decided to call it quits. I would have done anything to make him happy for the rest of my life, to make him forget. However, he had nothing left. I'd taken it all from him and cast it away. Ben didn't move far, and he remained a part of our lives almost every day. Yet, he was no longer my loving husband. He devoted his time and heart to our kids and remained polite to me, but the joy and love were gone. Betrayal has a way of erasing a man's view of his wife as something special and unique, transforming her into something ordinary, something to be scorned. I never remarried or dated. The man I loved stayed in my life, though at a distance, and that was enough to sustain me. Ending number 3, 6 months later, it seemed like we were on the path to recovery. Those had been 6 tough, guilt-ridden months. Life at home was far from normal, yet the anger had subsided, and both of us cried less often. I'm certain there were moments when he considered giving up, but he never did, and I wouldn't either. I was ready to apologize for the rest of my life. However, in a therapy session, there came a day when Ben turned to me with a profound sadness in his eyes and said, "You messed up, but it's time to stop now. I don't need your apologies anymore. I hope you never stop feeling remorse, but we both need to move forward." At that moment, I thought it was the end for us. The words "move forward" echoed in my mind, and I was convinced he was asking for a divorce. But then he continued, "I love you, Bonnie. I despise what you did, and if I ever see that guy again, I might want to punch him. But I want the woman I married back in my life. I want her back in my bed, to see her smile and hear her laughter. I want to grow old with her. We'll never forget what happened, but we can try to forgive." Tears welled up in his eyes. The rest of that session remains a blur in my memory. I clung to my husband, hugging and kissing him, crying and thanking him over and over. I was so afraid when he started speaking that I couldn't let go of him, fearing it might be the last time. There were moments when I could see the pain in his eyes and I understood what he was thinking. We never needed to say a word. I would simply go to him, stand beside him, or sit next to him, hugging him as if it were our last embrace, waiting until I saw him smile again. It always brought tears to my eyes, even now, because I know he carries that pain with him. I hurt this man deeply for no good reason, yet he forgave me. I will spend the rest of my life being the wife he truly deserves and offering prayers of gratitude for the second chance I received. On that significant day in August 2005, my friend, an 18-year-old high school graduate, burst into the door of our cozy 2-room apartment, and I couldn't believe my incredible luck. Her lifelong dream of becoming an actress had always seemed quite achievable to me, given her undeniable beauty and exceptional talent. This was unsurprising considering her vibrant cheerleading background and active involvement in various school drama productions throughout her school years. With her whole future ahead of her, the acting profession appeared to be a reachable reality. While my girlfriend had always been resolute about pursuing a career as an actress, I was still contemplating the direction of my own life. I wasn't particularly interested in college and was content working at McDonald's, allowing my girlfriend to take the lead. However, that day marked a turning point. Filled with excitement, she shared the news that she had secured a minor role in a highly acclaimed blockbuster film. It was an incredible development, though she only had 2 lines to deliver. It felt like a monumental step toward fulfilling her dream. She explained that the lead role in this fantastic opportunity was being played by a regular customer from Hooters restaurant. After promising her a role, and even booking a ticket to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I unquestionably believed in the opportunity that had arisen. Despite my naivety, I refrained from asking how she had managed to land such an incredible chance. In the evening, we gathered with friends to celebrate this momentous occasion. Each moment brought us closer to the allure and grandeur of Hollywood. Eager to have me accompany her on this journey, she reached out to a mysterious sponsor who generously purchased a ticket for me as well. Her happiness was infectious, and I had never seen her so elated before. Upon arriving in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, we were met with opulence. Checking into a luxurious hotel for 4 days was a thrilling experience. While my girlfriend was occupied with her scenes for 2 of those days, I didn't mind. I made the most of the opportunity, soaking up the atmosphere of stunning beaches and basking in the warm sun. The remaining days felt like an uninterrupted vacation, filled with beach excursions, lively parties, and even encounters with celebrities involved in the film production. It was like a dream come true. All of this served as motivation that fueled our desire for the glamorous lifestyle that the film industry offered. Upon returning to Pennsylvania, we couldn't shake off the allure of that world. We knew that our path led to Los Angeles, where my friend could wholeheartedly pursue her dreams in the film industry. Her time in St. Vincent and the Grenadines had allowed her to forge valuable connections with influential individuals. Furthermore, she firmly believed that upon our return to Pennsylvania, we should use the $15,300 she earned to embark on this incredible journey. Using a portion of her earnings from the film, we managed to secure a modest apartment in Los Angeles. Brimming with hope and anticipation, we were stepping into a new chapter of our lives. Days turned into months, and my girlfriend faced the challenging task of securing significant film roles in this bustling city. Every morning, she woke up early and attended auditions in the hope of achieving a long-awaited breakthrough. Unfortunately, she mainly came across minor roles in local business advertisements that offered meager compensation, falling short of our expectations. As her earnings from the movie role began to dwindle, we found ourselves needing to invest in new clothing and photographs for auditions. Recognizing the need to support ourselves, I decided to take a job at a fast food restaurant. It may not have been glamorous, but it provided us with the opportunity to start earning money and sustain our livelihood. As our savings dwindled, I witnessed her hopes and dreams gradually fade in her eyes. Every evening, we returned home, burdened by the weight of rejections and disappointments. As she came face to face with the harsh realities and fierce competition of the film industry in Los Angeles. In our small Pennsylvania town, she had been considered the epitome of beauty, but in this sprawling city, beauty was commonplace. Months turned into nearly a year, and she still couldn't secure a substantial role for herself. The clothing she bought was now secondhand, and prospects for advancement seemed uncertain. Eventually, she took a job as a shopping mall model, a significant departure from our lofty aspirations. Nevertheless, it allowed, albeit with difficulty, for the bills to be paid. During this period, I found my own path in life as a fitness trainer, balancing two jobs, one at a restaurant and the other training numerous clients. I aimed to provide stability and support. Our lives were consumed by individual pursuits, and as a result, we seldom found time for each other. Our dreams of success in the entertainment industry appeared to be slipping away, overshadowed by the demands of our busy lives. With each passing day, our dreams seemed to grow more distant. The unforgiving nature of the film and entertainment industry began to wear down my girlfriend's spirit, and I could only helplessly watch as she confronted the harsh reality that achieving success in Hollywood was far from the easy dream we had once envisioned. As time passed, her excessive spending drained our finances completely, and we began to struggle to make ends meet. I became increasingly frustrated with her for depleting our savings at an alarming rate. Finally, we managed to replenish our depleted savings. It happened unexpectedly when I was rummaging through her purse, searching for something, and stumbled upon a bundle of $1,500. Intrigued, I couldn't help but inquire about where she had obtained such a large sum of money. She appeared flustered but explained that a photographer she met at the mall had invited her to take pictures at his lavish mansion. I couldn't resist asking why she hadn't mentioned it earlier, to which she replied that she had intended to but somehow forgot. Curiosity got the better of me, and I continued my questioning, wanting to ensure the legitimacy of her earnings. She assured me that everything was fine. However, as she spoke of her best photos and posing in various outfits for professional photographers, doubt began to creep into my mind. Despite our naive understanding of the industry, I couldn't ignore suspicions about the potential for exploitation or ulterior motives. After all, we had heard stories of people in Hollywood willing to pay exorbitant sums for almost anything. I grew curious and asked her to show me the photos. To my surprise, she mentioned that producers rarely provided copies, and it would take some time before anything would be known about the photo shoots. In my naivety, I accepted her explanation without delving deeper into the matter. This situation persisted for the next 2 years. She frequently returned home late at night, attributing it to earning money by frequenting clubs and occupying VIP seats. She often claimed that her involvement in these projects was limited to gatherings in the VIP section. In other instances, she explained that some producers preferred conducting auditions and shooting scenes during the nighttime. However, as her nocturnal escapades became more frequent, a sense of unease settled within me. Worries about her safety and the company she kept began to overwhelm me. She tried to allay my concerns, arguing that she wasn't the only one engaging in such activities and that many of her friends were compensated similarly, but suspicions persisted in my mind, causing me to question the reality of her actions. Over time, I began to take notice of the company she was keeping, which primarily consisted of individuals typically associated with the adult film industry. Yet, in my naivety, I believed they were simply models. She defended herself by explaining that she had no control over her work schedule, as producers dictated her whereabouts and responsibilities. I tried to logically assess the situation, convincing myself that some producers might genuinely prefer nighttime shoots. All of this seemed to align logically with my limited understanding of the industry. One day, while taking a smoke break near our apartment, a pivotal moment occurred that shattered my illusions. A man in a large SUV pulled up and dropped her off right in front of our house. In that moment, my views on her nocturnal adventures were called into question, leaving me stunned. Shocked by what I witnessed, I couldn't muster the courage to immediately confront her. Instead, I went inside the house and discreetly observed her through the blinds as she entered. Anxiety gripped me at that moment. With a determined decision to uncover the truth about her activities, I secretly planned to follow her the next Friday when she went out. On that Friday, she went on a date with her friends, and I quietly began trailing her. In the end, she ended up at a club with a long line outside. To my surprise, the club's promoter granted my girlfriend and her friends special privileges, allowing them to bypass the long queue and enter the establishment swiftly. In my quest for answers, I reluctantly had to bribe a bouncer generously to gain entry inside the club. I carefully scanned the crowd, desperately searching for her. Finally, I spotted her in the VIP section, chatting animatedly and enjoying drinks with her friends. It seemed to match her earlier explanation, and I lingered there for a while. As I began to grow tired and prepared to leave, doubts about the man in the SUV still nagged at me. But those doubts quickly vanished when I realized it was just an Uber Black, and I felt foolish for suspecting betrayal. After scolding myself for being paranoid, I convinced myself that everything was fine and returned to my normal routine. At the time, I worked as a fitness trainer and also dabbled in multi-level marketing, selling dietary supplements and insurance. Thankfully, my average earnings covered rent and my living expenses. When I took charge of managing my own finances, I couldn't help but notice changes in my girlfriend's behavior and appearance. She became more secretive about her financial matters, which raised concerns for me. Occasionally, she displayed aggression toward me, only to apologize later, claiming it was unintentional. Furthermore, she started concealing her finances and paid less attention to her spending, leaving me questioning her financial habits. Despite initially trying to brush these concerns aside, I couldn't ignore the significant decline in her financial stability. She began losing a considerable amount of weight, hardly ate, showed signs of excessive nervousness, and experienced sleep problems. She often slept for extended periods, causing me to worry about her well-being. In my attempt to address her health issues, I made sure she ate properly, attributing her behavior to stress. However, one night, as I woke up, I noticed she wasn't in our bed. Baffled, I followed the noise coming from the bathroom. Driven by anxiety, to my horror, I discovered my girlfriend using a prohibited substance in the bathroom. I stumbled upon a stash of illegal substances, which caught her by surprise. In a panic, she attempted to hide everything but ended up spilling it on the floor. Her desperate actions to salvage the substances resembled a beggar clutching at scattered money. It marked a turning point in our relationship. Overwhelmed by emotions, both of us broke down in tears. She sincerely apologized and pledged to seek help and undergo rehabilitation immediately. It felt as though she had journeyed to Los Angeles, but lost not only herself but also our connection along the way. Unflinchingly addressing her issues, she bravely kept her promise and checked into a rehabilitation center the very next day. Throughout her month-long stay at the clinic, she displayed genuine remorse and determination, clinging to the hope of overcoming this dark phase and resurrecting her dream. When she completed her rehabilitation program and returned home, she appeared revitalized and filled with newfound strength and resolve. A wave of relief washed over me. Her return was particularly significant as my birthday approached. We had a tradition of going all out for each other's birthdays, always striving to outdo ourselves and create unforgettable celebrations. One day, she came home casually tossing her purse next to me and went to the bathroom. Curiosity got the better of me, and a few days before my birthday, I decided to search her bag. To my astonishment, I stumbled upon a CD labeled Pilot, and excitement and anticipation surged through me. Without hesitation, I popped it into the DVD player, eager to discover its contents, anticipating it might be a surprise related to me, or perhaps footage of a screen test she attended. I was utterly shocked and filled with anger as the unexpected truth unfolded on the screen. The video showed my girlfriend engaging in intimate activities with another man. It was an image I could hardly fathom. Overwhelmed by emotions, I stormed into the bathroom where she was showering, venting my anger and demanding an immediate explanation for her involvement in such actions. As she emerged from the shower, I noticed she was trembling, and she offered heartfelt apologies. She admitted that what I witnessed was initially meant as a one-time encounter, but had spiraled out of control. I could scarcely comprehend her words. Confused and in search of clarity, I asked her how long she had been involved in this industry. Reluctantly, she confessed that it had been ongoing for over a year. My confusion deepened when she struggled to provide an exact count of how many times she had participated in such activities. Citing the frequency blurred the boundaries and made it hard to keep track. What struck me even more was that the dates and timestamps on the videos coincided with the period when I believed she was in a rehabilitation center seeking help, not pursuing adult films for financial gain. Determined to rebuild my life, I cut off all contact with my ex-girlfriend and focused on my career as a fitness trainer and my involvement in multi-level marketing. Unfortunately, the latter turned out to be a pyramid scheme that was eventually shut down by authorities, dashing my hopes. Undeterred, I decided to invest my savings in opening a gym. However, the high expenses in California posed a significant challenge. Opting to join the Planet Fitness franchise, I seized the opportunity to open a small gym in my Pennsylvania hometown. Before leaving California, wanting to be transparent, I reached out to my ex-girlfriend to inform her of my departure. Despite our breakup 6 months earlier, our connection remained strong, and our phone conversation stirred up emotions in both of us. She spoke of feeling abandoned, emphasizing that I had brought her to California and then abandoned her when she needed me most. Her words left me speechless, and I found myself immersed in memories of our shared youth and the dreams we once held together. Having made the decision to return to my hometown, I took the initiative to establish the Planet Fitness Center. As the business began to thrive, I also found solace in close relationships that brought joy and fulfillment back into my life. However, over time, I heard unsettling rumors that my ex-girlfriend had turned to a life of street-based solicitation to support her illegal substance use. Initially skeptical, I decided to investigate and discover the truth firsthand. What I uncovered left me utterly shocked. The person I once knew had become a mere shell, devoid of the vibrant soul I had cherished. About 2 years after the opening of my gym, the situation took an unexpected turn. Everything had been going smoothly for me. The membership at my gym kept growing, and it seemed like life was on a positive trajectory. But then, an unexpected and devastating piece of news reached me. My ex-girlfriend had passed away while with a client, having consumed an excessive amount of a prohibited substance. The moment I received this heart-wrenching information, chills ran down my spine, and I rushed home, unable to contain my emotions. I sat on the shower floor, overcome by uncontrollable grief and tears. To this day, I still carry guilt and never cease to wonder if I could have done something differently. Despite reassurances from my therapist, pain and regret continue to weigh heavily on my heart.